Bon matin, good morning everyone. Madame la Secrétaire.
Merci. We will start this morning with a presentation from Bell Mobility, Inc. Please introduce yourself and your colleagues, and you have 20 minutes for your presentation.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Rob Malcolmson, and I am BCE's Chief Regulatory Officer. It is my pleasure to introduce our panel. To my right is Mirko Bibic, President and CEO of BCE and Bell Canada. To Mirko's right are two of the senior leaders at Bell Mobility, overseeing our wireless business across the country, Claire Gillis, President, Bell Mobility, and Martin DeGoyer, Senior Vice President, Consumer Marketing. To my left is Mark Graham, Assistant General Counsel, Regulatory Policy and Competition. Next to Mark is Margaret Sanderson, Vice President and Practice Leader of Antitrust and Competition Economics at Charles River and Associates. Next to Margaret is Bruce Rodin, Vice President, Wireless Network Strategy. And finally, next to Bruce is Florence Chan, Legal Counsel at BCE. We will begin our presentation with a short video that illustrates what's at stake in this proceeding.
Whether we're at work or play, at home or on the go, Canadians enjoy exceptional wireless communication experiences from coast to coast. And it's thanks to a Canadian-owned industry that we can all be proud of. Canada has the fastest average mobile download speeds among the G7 countries and Australia, with twice the average download speeds of the United States. And Canada's world-leading networks provide excellent coverage to both cities and rural communities. LTE Advanced Networks cover 95% of Canadians, and LTE networks cover 99%. In fact, wireless service in rural Canada outperforms wireless service across all areas of many advanced countries, like Sweden and France. So how did a country with a population smaller than the state of California emerge as a world leader in wireless communications? Canada has a long history of driving wireless innovation, and our wireless industry has achieved that success with a regulatory framework that consistently encourages major investments in emerging technologies. The wireless industry currently invests about $3 billion annually to enhance the coverage and quality of networks across the country. The industry is also a major investor in research and development. BCE alone invested over $500 million in research and development in 2018, more than any other company in the industry. As a result of these investments, the Canadian wireless industry contributes over $30 billion annually in GDP to the Canadian economy. That's a win for all Canadians. Plus, Canadians currently enjoy more choice, more data, lower prices, and better networks than ever before. Regardons les faits. L'utilisation de données explose et les forfaits de données limitées sont devenus largement accessibles. Les prix ont baissé progressivement. Selon le CRTC, le prix mensuel moyen de service mobile avec appels illimités, messagerie texte et 5 gigaoctets de données était jusqu'à 35% moins élevé en 2018 qu'en 2016. Et un récent rapport indépendant de PwC a trouvé que les services sans fil au Canada sont plus abordables que ceux des États-Unis. Malgré cette réussite, nous ne pouvons pas nous permettre d'être complaisants. Le Canada est en concurrence dans une économie de plus en plus mondiale. Nous avons besoin d'un accès à des services mobiles plus rapides et plus puissants, afin de répondre aux demandes technologiques de demain. Des appareils 5G de Samsung, LG, Apple et autres seront bientôt offerts, ainsi que des solutions idéaux comme les véhicules autonomes, les villes intelligentes et l'agriculture de précision transformeront la façon dont les Canadiens travaillent et vivent. La 5G va également offrir au Canada une grande opportunité économique. D'ici 2026, on estime que plus de 150 000 emplois seront créés dans la construction et l'ingénierie des réseaux 5G du Canada. Il y aura aussi une incidence de 40 milliards de dollars sur le PIB annuel du Canada. Afin de tirer parti de cette opportunité et de devenir compétitif dans une économie mondiale, le Canada doit se préparer pour la 5G. À l'heure actuelle, le Canada risque de prendre du retard dans la course mondiale à la 5G. Pour suivre le rythme du reste du monde et s'assurer que tous les Canadiens en bénéficieront, Accenture estime que le Canada requiert que ses télécommunicateurs investissent 26 milliards de dollars en la technologie 5G d'ici 2026. The wrong regulatory framework will stall investment from the country's facilities-based carriers precisely when it's needed most. With the right regulatory framework, we can continue to invest in research and development. We can continue to bridge the digital divide and compete in the global economy. We can continue to provide Canadians with world-class wireless services. And BCE will be proud to lead the way in advancing how Canadians connect with each other and the world.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Commissioners, chez Bell, comme vous venez juste de l'entendre, notre objectif est d'améliorer la façon dont les Canadiens communiquent entre eux et avec le reste du monde. Et pour atteindre cet objectif, nous sommes guidés par des impératifs stratégiques précis qui comprennent les mesures suivantes. Bâtir les meilleurs réseaux, tirer profit de ces réseaux pour fournir aux consommateurs et aux entreprises des services spéciaux et innovateurs à des prix abordables, et investir pour promouvoir l'expérience client dans nos interactions avec les Canadiens. Nous avons choisi notre objectif parce que nous entrons dans une nouvelle ère de communication. Les déploiements de la fibre et des réseaux 5G vont offrir des vitesses multi-gigabits favorisant l'Internet des objets, la réalité augmentée et virtuelle, l'intelligence artificielle, l'apprentissage machine et d'autres applications que nous n'avons pas encore imaginées. Cet environnement nous positionne de manière à franchir la prochaine étape afin de transformer la façon dont les Canadiens communiquent. Cela signifie offrir plus de valeur que jamais aux consommateurs. Cela signifie combler l'écart entre les collectivités urbaines et rurales. Et cela signifie construire des réseaux qui favorisent l'innovation et stimulent l'économie canadienne moderne, tout en améliorant la productivité des entreprises et en créant de la croissance économique. That is why this hearing is pivotal, and certainly is the most important I have attended in my 16 years in telecom, and I've been in this room for many hearings. Since 2008, the government and the Commission have supported the growth of a fourth wireless operator in markets across the country. That policy is achieving its goal. Today, Canadians in every province are served by 4 facilities-based wireless providers and have an unprecedented choice of 10 or more brands, offering a wide range of services to meet different needs and budgets across the board. Wireless prices continue to decline, promotional activity is intense, and pricing and service innovation is constant. The wireless market has never been more competitive. Looking to the future, we expect that policymakers and the Commission share our goal of delivering unprecedented value to Canadians, bridging the urban and rural divide, and driving the innovation economy and Canada's economic prosperity. Given these shared goals, a key focus in this hearing should be how to build the digital infrastructure required to achieve them. That means making the once-in-a-generation upgrade to 5G networks as quickly as we can. It also means building those networks not just in downtown Montreal and Toronto, but throughout Canada's suburban, rural, and remote regions. To do this, we really do need a policy and regulatory environment that unlocks the investment of private risk capital required to put tens of thousands of Canadians to work, designing and building 5G networks in communities of every size across the country. This is critical because we absolutely cannot take Canada's world-leading wireless networks for granted. Last year, BCE invested almost $4 billion in capital, as we also noted in the video we showed. These investments must be made every year to maintain the world-leading networks and quality services Canadians expect. In fact, the need is even greater now as we enhance our wireless networks to support unlimited plans and build out 5G. Public policy and regulatory rules inevitably affect our investments, and regulatory uncertainty increases the risk profile of the entire industry's investments. Quite simply, if the Commission strays from its long-standing policy of encouraging investments in networks and instead favors wireless resale, we know what will happen. Significant wireless investments will be delayed or will be abandoned. In global capital markets, the cost of capital for Canadian carriers will increase and investment will flow out of Canada, reducing our competitiveness. We've seen this happen firsthand as recently as last year. The Commission's decision on regulated access rates for fixed broadband caused an immediate 20% reduction in our planned wireless home internet rural broadband build, reducing coverage by 200,000 homes. In Quebec, one of our competitors withdrew its most advanced service from the market entirely. In Atlantic Canada, a regional competitor cut $50 million from its annual investment plans. All across the country, providers confirmed the decision would reduce investment. The risk to wireless investment could easily be much greater. Imposing wireless resale would be a dramatic swing in the regulatory pendulum, just as wireless operators begin investing in 5G. As other countries have discovered, when wireless investment falls behind, it is very difficult to catch up. If Canada becomes a 5G laggard, then instead of closing the digital divide, new divides will emerge, not just between our largest cities and our suburban and rural communities, but also between Canada and the world's wireless leaders. In our view, there's no reason to take these risks now. As Claire will discuss in a moment, wireless prices are falling. Regional competitors are stronger than ever, and the market has been transformed with the introduction of unlimited data and device financing plans. The fact is, policy goals related to affordability, and choice are being achieved without sacrificing the success of our policy of encouraging competition between networks. Claire?
I joined Bell 20 years ago, and there's no question that today Canadians get more value from their wireless services, and the market is more competitive than at any other time in my career. In just over a decade, we have moved from CDMA to HSPA to LTE to LTE Advanced, and now we are moving to 5G. We consistently deliver more value to our customers, better prices, more minutes, more data, and more support for our customers, while providing higher speeds, wider coverage, greater reliability, and greater functionality. While we prepare for the launch of 5G, independent third parties continue to recognize our network leadership. OpenSignal has described Canada as a global 4G superpower and noted that Canada offers users among the fastest and most accessible 4G networks across its vast rural landscape. PCMag has noted that in Canada, they see average LTE speeds that exceed what we're seeing on Sprint's new 5G network in the U.S. Just last week, OpenSignal recognized that Canadians benefit from speeds that are almost equal to those of South Korea, which was the first in the world to launch a national 5G network. High-quality services in Canada are not, however, limited to world-leading network speeds. They also include other technology leadership. For example, when the Apple Watch launched wireless capability, Bell was one of just 14 carriers from around the world chosen to support the product. Canada is routinely included in the initial launches of the most advanced devices, but our place among these world leaders would be at risk if investment falters. The value of leading-edge technology is not just about industrial applications and the digital economy, but about the quality of a user's daily experience with their mobile device. Whether you're downloading a large file to review while traveling, watching Crave on your lunch hour, calling for help from a remote stretch of highway, or using an app to navigate a new city, the high quality of Canada's wireless networks improves the way you live, work, and are entertained. And that is what our customers value most. At the same time, prices have been falling fast. According to the Commission, between 2016 and 2018, the average price of a 5 gigabyte plan fell 35%, and the average price of a 2 gigabyte plan fell by 28%. For each gigabyte of wireless data, our customers are now paying up to 80% less than they did when your last review of the wireless market was completed at the end of 2015. In the 2-year period leading up to the launch of this proceeding, Canadian wireless carriers made more than 14,000 price reductions to the products and services they offer. During that time, we also launched a new wireless brand, Lucky Mobile, focused solely on affordability. At our launch 2 years ago, Chatter offered a zone plan with 1 gigabyte of data for $40. Today, Lucky Mobile offers a similar 1 gigabyte plan with no zone restrictions for just $25. For $40, a Canadian can now get 5 gigabytes of data. Last summer, we introduced device financing plans and affordable unlimited data plans at rates that are lower than entry-level unlimited plans in the United States. This has transformed the market, and the plans have already been adopted by millions of Canadians. And just in the last 6 months, we've seen an unprecedented level of competitive activity, including gifts with purchase up to $850, subsidizing the latest iPhones by up to $1,000, gift cards and bill credits, each worth up to $400, rate plan discounts of $15 per line for multiple user accounts, rate plan discounts of $10 per month off the posted price for 15 months, and countless other competitive initiatives. This type of activity is too often ignored in the public policy discussion, but it's an important feature of competition in the market and delivers significant value to consumers. To illustrate this value, an $850 gift with purchase is equivalent to a $35 reduction in the monthly rate over a 2-year contract. And even as the price of iconic devices has increased to reach $1,500 or more, something we cannot control, hardware promotions, discounts, and credits mean that they remain accessible to millions of Canadians, often for $0 upfront. The fact is, Canadians can choose among a variety of competitive wireless service providers, and they often do. According to the Commission's data, Canadians switched wireless providers more than 5 million times during 2018. Looking ahead, competition will only become more intense. Regional wireless carriers now win about 1 in every 3 net additional subscribers in the industry, a 33% market share. It's clear that facilities-based competition is continuously driving us to invest and innovate and to differentiate ourselves as we fight for market share. To continue to deliver more value to Canadians, we launch new brands, introduce new types of plans, invest in leading-edge technology, deliver new functionality, create world-class retail experiences, lower our prices, and maintain extensive promotional activity. That's what it takes to succeed in the highly competitive Canadian market.
The Commission has determined on 4 separate occasions since 2015 that mandating wholesale access for MVNOs would put facilities-based competition at risk, and that the negative impact on investment would outweigh any potential benefits. The extensive record before you today confirms those findings. First, the evidence is clear that facilities-based competition is working. All the evidence shows that prices are falling and the market is being transformed by unlimited plans. And, as you heard yesterday, the Competition Bureau's own independent expert concluded that prices are declining as a result of growing facilities-based competition. This success is reflected in the latest research from the Commission, which shows that 83% of Canadians are satisfied with their wireless service provider. Second, it's indisputable that the market is more competitive than it was when you made your findings in 2015. Since then, the price of data has fallen between 37% and 80%. About 5 million subscribers have entered the market, increasing penetration to a level equivalent to 100% of the population aged 10 years and older. Regional carriers have expanded their LTE coverage from 31% to 75% of the population. Unlimited plans and installment plans have been introduced. We introduced the Lucky Mobile brand, and Videotron introduced its Fizz Mobile brand, increasing choice at the entry level. Third, there's no evidence that mandating access for MVNOs in Canada would bring material benefits to consumers that are not already being achieved through facilities-based competition. Finally, the evidence is clear that mandating access for MVNOs will significantly undermine investment, put the regional entrants at risk, and, as the Bureau said in its report, could exacerbate existing network gaps for rural and remote communities. In fact, the evidence on this point is even stronger today, on the cusp of a massive investment in 5G than it was in 2015. Given the opportunity 5G represents, the harm to Canada and Canadians would be much greater now. CRA calculated that an MVNO access mandate would reduce wireless investment by almost $500 million annually in the short run, and substantially more in the long run. This investment supports tens of thousands of skilled and good-paying jobs in dozens of communities across the country. All of the MVNO proposals put forward in this proceeding have the same fundamental problem. Once you adopt a resale model, investment stalls, innovation lags, network quality suffers, and areas outside large urban centers fall further behind. We urge the Commission to follow the evidence where it continues to lead, to the conclusion that mandating access for MVNOs would not be in the public interest. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in today's hearing, and we'd be pleased to answer your questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation. Commissioner Leisner.
Good morning, and thank you very much for your presentation and your interest in this proceeding. I was interested to see in the video that you showed us, and also your comments about the focus on investment for Bell. And so I'd like to start my questioning basically talking about your investments and how they're affected by things like profitability. First of all, maybe you could let us know how your investment intensity would vary by the stage of new generation network investment cycle.
So I'll let Mirko speak to that in a minute, but investment intensity obviously goes up and down depending on the stage in a particular technology cycle. Our investment intensity in terms of 2020, I think we're projecting that we'll increase our CapEx by roughly $200 million to $900 million of wireless CapEx. And that's in large part as we prepare for the rollout of 5G. So we're at a stage right now where the investment intensity, the capital spend is beginning to rise even further, and will continue to do so for the next few years. I think the CWTDA has published a report by Accenture that says industry-wide the capital investment required of our industry to roll out 5G and become a 5G leader is something in the range of $26 billion. So that's why we're so concerned about an MVNO mandate of any form, given the impact it's going to have on investment at a critical juncture.
So our overall, hearings about wireless MVNOs, but we're running a Bell in totality, BC in totality, which is really a portfolio company. We have several business units. And so the top level, our capital intensity, is in that 16 to 17% range, the capital intensity ratio. So it tends to be a stable $4 billion of capital each and every year. Now, if you can maintain your capital intensity ratio stable at the same level and your revenues grow, of course, the amount you get to spend in absolute dollars grows, but you can look at BCE's overall revenue growth. It's not hard to figure out. And then that's why our capital intensity ratio is always in that 16 to 17% range, and given our overall growth, that's why you tend to have stability around the $3.9 to $4 billion in absolute dollars. So now if you're to get to your very specific question, if you're at the beginning of the investment cycle on something like 5G, where I said 2 weeks ago on our results call that we expect our wireless capital intensity ratio to creep up to the 9 to 10% range during the build cycle. You're seeing that we would anticipate, provided the conditions are right, we would anticipate investing more in wireless to accommodate this 5G build cycle, but that $4 billion, $4 billion of absolute dollars is going to pretty much stay stable. So something else is going to come down as a consequence.
Okay.
Now, of course, if competitive dynamics change, if the regulatory conditions change, it has an impact on your anticipated impact on your revenues, and you keep your capital intensity ratio the same, or you lower it as a consequence of your drop in revenues, that's going to have an impact on your on the absolute dollars you have to invest. And that's why these decisions, as we said in the video and we say in our opening statement, are going to have an impact. Just math. And it's what we have to deliver to shareholders, who are the people who provide us with the capital. $4 billion is a lot of capital that they're supplying, and they expect a return on that, of course.
Is there a difference in terms of your medium or long-term investment plans and their sensitivity on level of profitability?
So what, the way we look at this is, let's go back to just the Bell example. So it's $4 billion in capital every year. So let's capital investment. So those are the dollars we invest in trucks and set-top boxes and the antennas and the towers, like it's, those kinds of things, to build the networks, to maintain the networks. And as I said, I'll repeat myself a little bit, but I think it's important and germane. We have the opportunity, in fact, the privilege to spend that amount of money, because what we're delivering to the shareholders in return, keep it simple, is dividends. And we need to grow that dividend at the same time. If we don't deliver those dividends, and if we don't grow those dividends, then we're not going to get the $4 billion the next year and the year after that. And that's basically how it works. So now to the profitability. So if your revenues are affected by a particular exogenous factor, you have to, there's revenues. If they get affected, to keep your profitability stable, or you need to grow it, frankly, you need to cut your expenses. So things like people, salaries is one. Your retail experience is another. Advertising would be another. So you cut those things. Those aren't capital dollars. Those are your operating expenses, so that you can keep your earnings stable or growing. And then once you have your earnings, your profitability, below that, from that you spend your capital, you pay your shareholders, et cetera. So ultimately, to continue paying your shareholders their dividends and to continue to grow them, in the face of an exogenous factor that's negative on revenues, you have two levers: expenses, so example again, salary, advertising, those kinds of things, or capital dollars. Those are the two things you can pull the lever pretty much, in the short term, in order to keep your free cash flow growing, so that you can generate a return for your shareholders and keep that dividend growing. And if you don't, then you don't get the $4 billion the following year, and your cost of capital goes up. I mean, that's basically how it works.
Just to come back, if I may. Just to come back to the investment point for a minute, because much of yesterday seemed to be spent talking about the various MVNO models, rather than the evidence before you in terms of impact of investment of an MVNO mandate. And I think it's important to discuss it. So we had our expert, Margaret Sanderson, do an analysis based on an exhaustive study that had been done in 2011 by a firm called Kim, that looked at the impact of MVNO access on investment on 58 operators in 21 countries over an 8-year period. And what they did was they compared jurisdictions that had mandated MVNO access with those that did not, or those that had voluntary access. And they found that an MVNO mandate reduced investment intensity, CapEx, by 17.1% in the short run and 33% in the long run. And then we asked Margaret to extrapolate those findings of that exhaustive study to the Canadian context and tell us what the impact would be on industry-wide investment. And as we mentioned in our oral presentation, it's $489 million in the short run annually. So it is a significant issue before you.
I did note that comment in your remarks. As you know, there are a variety of proposed MVNO models that have been submitted in the course of the written interventions, and we started exploring some of them yesterday. But if I look at the two ends of the pendulum, so to speak, the Competition Bureau's model would have MVNOs accorded to regional carriers with facilities, whereas the CNOC model, of course, would be far more wide scale in terms of MVNO access to the carriers RAN. So how do those two models square with your comment about a $500 million loss? I mean, wouldn't there be a scale there?
So the short answer is yes. There are three models in front of you. There's the broad-based CNOC model, you called it. There's the Cogeco model, which isn't much different from the broad-based model in our view, and then the Bureau model. Certainly the broad-based model, and I thought Shaw did a very eloquent job yesterday explaining that in that model, the MVNOs will use the higher quality networks but target the customer base of the new entrants, and that will completely undermine the new entrants. So the broad-based model, I think, undermines in particular the new entrants, and it will hurt us as well. And then the Cogeco model, when we look at it, it seems somewhat self-serving in the sense that it's really just leveraging wireline facilities into access to wireless spectrum, but not investing in wireless spectrum, again, riding on someone else's wireless network. So that'll have a similar impact. And then you mentioned the Bureau's model. You know, it's the least intrusive of the models in front of you. So I think on that continuum of investment impact, it's probably fair to say the investment impact would be less, but it would nevertheless be significant. And ultimately,
How much less would it be?
I haven't quantified the numbers. We're happy to do that, but
Okay.
the bookend
I'd be
is.
interested to know, where that $500 million is on the scale of models, and what your estimate would be of the impact to you in terms of the Competition Bureau model, for example.
We can do that work.
Okay, great.
If I could jump in on that, from my point of view, each of the models is an aggressive form of regulatory intervention at a time when the wireless market's never been so competitive. Certainly more competitive than 2015, when the Commission found that the harm to investment would outweigh any benefits from an MVNO. So they're all highly aggressive. Happens to be that the Bureau model is the least of a range of highly aggressive options, and they will all unequivocally affect investment. I'll give you another example, and this has nothing to do with a regulatory decision, so I think let's move away from regulatory decisions, or let's stop blaming regulatory decisions for a second in my answer. So unlimited plans came into the market last year. Undeniably good for consumers, but it has an impact on the network, because as subscribers move to unlimited plans, they consume more data. It's obvious, and it's good for them. In fact, probably the consumers in Canada who've moved to unlimited plans on average probably use 3 times as much data as they used to. And I think my rough estimate is that there likely are over 2 million Canadians now on unlimited plans. And my rough estimate is that as a result of the increase in usage, we've had to increase capacity in each of the large networks, so the 4 or 5 large networks in the country. In 2019 and expected for 2020, I think the industry will probably spend around $700 million in those 2 years in incremental capacity, industry-wide, to accommodate those 2 million plus subscribers moving to unlimited and tripling their usage. Now, in our case, that $4 billion that I talked about at the very beginning didn't jump to $4 billion plus whatever Bell is spending in order to accommodate that usage. So something else fell off. So now let's move back to regulatory. Even the least aggressive of the highly aggressive forms of intervention that we're talking about here would mean somebody else's subscribers riding on somebody else's network creating an increase in capacity, which has to be accommodated one of two ways. We either increase the capital to accommodate that usage, in which case some other project doesn't get funded, or we say forget it. Like we're tired of investing for somebody else's subscribers. The networks are really, really, really good in Canada. They're going to be really, really good for 2, 3, 4 more years to go. And we're just not going to invest in that incremental capacity. So those, I mean, you have trade-offs. Something else doesn't get funded or the quality suffers. It's one of the two.
So actually, your comments lead into a question I was going to ask you, and I think you've talked about a little bit about the factors that drive wireless carriers' decisions with respect to investments in their networks. And what factors influence the level of the investment you make to expand coverage as opposed to investing in existing infrastructures to improve the quality of your existing networks? Is there anything else you'd like to add to that?
Sure, I can speak to that one. I mean, I think it's always an evaluation of the market opportunity. And so when we think about do we extend coverage to new territories and regions, it's a matter of what is the opportunity for us from both a market share and a revenue opportunity versus the opportunity to expand the service quality within our existing footprint. So it's always a trade-off where we're doing a detailed business case, and really it is a stacked ranked model for us. So that's how we look at our investment, whether it's a new market or whether it's existing service enhancements for our current customer base.
And do other lines of business, such as your broadband and wireline services, subsidize investments in infrastructure that are used to offer another range of services, or do you keep everything siloed?
No, I think, obviously at the highest level, and Mirko can also speak to this, at BCE's level, we've talked about our capital intensity, and it absolutely is a model that we look at across the entire organization. So if the need is for fiber, then we're doing fiber. If the need is for 5G, we're doing 5G. So we actually do look at it in a very holistic way as to what are the greatest priorities for the business and for the consumers that we serve.
Okay, thank you. I think I want to change gears now to a discussion about some of the elements that we've been looking at in terms of market definition in the retail market power assessment aspect of this proceeding. So your position is that we should be looking at census metropolitan areas, as I understand, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And how do you see that in terms of non-CMA areas, the rural and, outside urban areas, surrounding areas, in terms of the differences between those competitive landscapes of urban versus rural?
So I think in terms of, market definition, another option that we've suggested you could use, which is roughly equivalent from the competitive assessment perspective, but helps on this issue, is I said Tier 4 license areas. So I think the key point we're making is that the competitive dynamic is often at a more localized level, and the competitive set is often varies between that more localized level.
So you wouldn't be adverse to grouping CMAs, for example?
If they were in the same Tier 4 service area, no.
For conducting your market power assessment?
Correct.
Okay. But how do you take into account the areas that are not included in that Tier 4 in your assessment of the market?
Bruce, I think I don't think you run into that same problem with the Tier 4 areas that you do with the CMAs.
Okay. You mentioned that in terms of pricing, Canadian prices have declined for mobile wireless services. And how would you compare that to the rate of decline in other countries, for example?
Sure, and it's an important question because there seems to be this perception that prices in Canada, while declining, are not declining at the same rate of decline as in other jurisdictions. And that was a point you made in your opening comments, Mr. Chairman, and it's a point, it's a fundamental component of the Bureau's evidence. And so we did take a close look at it. And when the Bureau did their work, they made the point that, and they filed a graph, it was figure 6 of their November 22nd submission, just for reference. They filed a graph that showed Canada's prices weren't declining as quickly as in other territories. The data they used, and it's a bit of a flaw in terms of all of the data in front of you, it was old. They used the Wall study from 2018, and what that, it did show that Canada's prices were falling not as quickly. But what's happened is, if I plug in the current pricing for a 1 gig plan, a 2 gig plan, a 5 gig plan today, if I plug that into the Wall's buckets of data, you'll find that, in fact, Canadian prices are declining either faster or in a manner that's comparable. And I'll give you some examples. In the study that the Bureau relied on, they listed a 1 gig plan as being priced to $70.99. Well, fast forward to today, a 1 gig plan is available from Lucky Mobile for $25 and from Virgin for $45. So a significant decline at that level. The Wall study had a 2 gig plan at $75, and the Bureau relied on that. And again, fast forward to today, a 2 gig plan is available for $35 from Freedom, $50 from Koodo. A 5 gig plan was listed by the Wall study as being $87.32, but today 5 gig plans are available from anywhere from $40 to $60. And then finally, they looked at...
So you're not aggregating the prices of those plans, so you're picking individual plans by individual brands.
We looked at the least expensive, well, I just gave you a sample, but if you look at the least expensive plans that I just read out to you, the cheapest plan listed in the 1 gig, 2 gig, and 5 gig baskets would average around $33. That's much different than the evidence the Bureau put in front of you.
Yeah, and I think I'd like to add to Rob's response, if I may. I mean, I think the most important thing we have to do is not to solely make the comparisons on price. You know, I think that's a very, very dangerous approach for us to take. We have to consider all the variables as it relates to quality. We have to look at coverage. You know, we offer 95% of Canadians access with LTE advanced speeds of up to 1.5 gigabytes. We offer incredible reliability. We talk about the number of retail outlets we have. We talk about other benefits like loyalty programs. So I think when you look at price, you can't just do rate plan to rate plan. And we also need to make sure that when you're looking at a global scale, you also look at whether the device is included in the plan. I think it's very critical that we look at an apples-to-apples comparison, and I think there is some evidence that Canadians actually have some of the very best plans in the G7 based on a most recent PwC survey. So I think you can't not do that. And then I think the last point is we have to ensure that we look at other promotional type of activity on top of the plans. One of the things I spoke about in my opening statement was that we offer customers discounts for multi-user plans. So we have to look at all of the aspects, not just the posted price.
I won't belabor the point, but paragraph 36 of Claire's opening statement is fundamental, and it just astounds me all the time when we do these pricing studies. They never, ever, ever consider the gifts with purchase and the device subsidization and the multiple line discounts ever. Okay. And the handset piece is so important because we cannot control that ever. And first of all, no one in Canada has the scale to be able to dictate to an Apple or a Samsung what the price is going to be that we pay for the device. And so that's an important thing. We can't. You really do get into an apples oranges problem when you do these international benchmarking studies.
And just to come back to make sure I didn't confuse anyone, in terms of the Wall study that the Bureau relied on, the prices that I gave you as the prices that the Bureau relied on were the actual prices from the wall study. So when I said a 1 gig plan for $70.99, that's what the Bureau relied upon to come to its conclusion that Canadian prices weren't falling as quickly as other jurisdictions.
And would you be willing to file those prices, the underlying data for those prices that you've just talked about on the record?
Yes.
Okay. I think it was March 10th was the deadline, so that and the previous undertaking. But if we're talking about pricing, promotions, competition, that sort of thing, a few months ago, your company and other national MNOs introduced mobile wireless plans that had no overage charges. And we've seen on the record of this proceeding, the Competition Bureau, TechSavvy, for instance, questioning the timing of the introduction of those plans and that they may have been motivated by the threat of regulatory intervention. So I'd like to give you an opportunity to respond to that.
I'll ask Claire to respond in a second, but I think it's fair to say that the introduction of unlimited plans had nothing to do with the regulatory proceeding. It was one of many responses to what's increasingly a competitive marketplace. For example, when Freedom introduced their big gig plan, the national carriers responded, and then a national carrier decided to introduce unlimited plans, and again, the market responded, and that's indicative of the level of competitive intensity that we see, and it's benefiting consumers. But
and
Claire,
when you introduce plans like this one, do you have a certain period of time in mind for how long they will be in the marketplace, or before you review them, or once they're there, they're generally?
Sure. So let me jump in on that one.
Stay.
I mean, first of all, I started by saying I've been in this industry for 20 years. I have never seen a level of competitive intensity as it is today. The rivalry amongst carriers across the country in every region is at a new level. And what you saw with the introduction of the no overage plans last summer is exactly an example of that. One of our competitors press released the day before they went to market that they were going to launch that. It was critical to our market share and our overall performance that we were able, because we thought that was a very attractive offering for consumers, that we needed to make sure we closed that competitive gap quickly. So that's the first thing. I think it's an absolute example of the rivalry we have in the market. No one gets an inch. And then when you think about the timelines, it's all constantly about market evaluation. We look at what is the impact of those plans? Is it causing switching behavior? Are we seeing customers downgrade their plan, change their average monthly fee, move up, churn? We're looking at every indicator on those plans. Other things you might look at is cost to serve.
Right.
So we're looking at all of those aspects on a daily basis to judge whether that is a good thing for our business,
So to what extent would the decline in costs of offering a service impact pricing by Bell in terms of lowering prices? There are those who've said the cost of providing a gigabyte of data has gone down, so ergo the prices at the retail level should also go down.
I think the observation that prices have declined over the years is a reflection of new technology being introduced and causing a decline in costs. We do, as we produce more capacity every year, the cost per gigabyte does decline, and new technologies allow us to use spectrum and equipment more efficiently. And that's ultimately what's enabled the price declines that we've pointed to. And the price declines every year in this industry, and that's really, at heart what enables that.
So lowering of costs of offering the service has an impact on the pricing.
That, and then the competitive dynamic, which Claire talked to, that's the starting point. But the cost curve of the industry is kind of the enabler that allows that to happen. There's plenty of industries where price doesn't decline because cost doesn't decline. Take milk for an example. But the product we generate is technology that is changing every single year, and it does play a factor in terms of what we bring to market.
In competitive markets, you'll tend to find that it's price that determines cost and not the other way around. So you have to react to the competitive market, which Martin says, and then you got to force yourself to adjust your cost base if prices are coming down. If prices are coming down because of competition, you're not adjusting your cost structure, you're not going to be very competitive for long. Now, of course, unit costs can also come down due to changes in technology, but in our industry as well, as you see unit costs come down and these price innovations coming into the market, like unlimited plans, like I said before, your absolute costs may go up if there's a rush to the networks and usage goes up. So you're always balancing all these things. But typically, it's not cost determining price, but in a competitive market, price determining cost and forcing you to be more efficient.
So we've seen some reports in the media. I'm thinking of an article in Journal de Montréal in January 9th of this year, reporting that Bell Mobility is going to increase the price of certain wireless plans in March of this year. And that, for example, you're going to increase your 10 gigabyte bring your own device plan that was originally priced at $60 to $70. So I'm just wondering, why are these prices increasing given your statements on the level and intensity of competition?
Sure. I mean, I'll respond to that. I think first and foremost, we look at price increases with consumers as to where they are in their contract life cycle. So, I mean, the first thing to state is customers are never price increased within their contract cycle. So those customers for whom we are looking at doing price increases, as you saw in that article, are off contract. So that's the first point I think that we need to get on the record. The second thing is, again, we introduce price plans as the market changes and as the market intensity is as it is. And then we look at what are we bringing to the market in terms of new network capability, new service capability, as those customers go through their life cycle. It's like any other industry. I mean, I'm pretty sure Tim Hortons increases the price of my donut every year as well. I don't know if anyone else wants to add anything.
And I think one of the things that Claire pointed to was the level of promotional activity. And so promotions run their course. We offer things for Black Friday, for Boxing Week, and things like that. And after time, those promotions end. It's the same with other products. The promotions end, and then the regular price returns. And so some of the things that you see are promotional periods that end. We've honored them for the life of the contract, and then the price goes back to a more regular price.
And what factors influence your pricing determinations in different regions of the country?
So there's a number of factors in every market. We've got a different, there's demographic factors. There's the competitive dynamic. There is your position in that market, and what you hope to achieve. If you've got targets to meet in a particular market, and you're not doing as well as you'd like to do, that will set off marketing activity to improve that performance. And that pricing is one of those levers that we use in a market.
And when we look at the different regions across Canada, we talked about this a bit yesterday, about how prices are generally lower in Quebec than in other provinces. Do you have a view on why mobile wireless prices are lower in Quebec?
I'll start, and others may want to supplement, but you're right, they are lower. And when we looked at it, we compared Quebec and Alberta just for a point of comparison. In Quebec, the average ARPU is just over $59, and penetration in Quebec, wireless penetration, is 76%. If you move over to Alberta, the ARPU is $77, but penetration is 89%. You would expect the inverse of that to be true if pricing was driving penetration. So clearly, in the province of Quebec, there are some different demand factors at play that are, even though prices are lower, demand or penetration is not as high. So that speaks to the uniqueness of that market. It could be people rely on fixed internet access more. It's not clear to us, but there is a difference, and it seems to be attributable to demand factors. Otherwise, you would expect a different outcome than the one I just referred to.
And the network quality in Quebec would be similar to other provinces like Ontario, for example, right?
Certainly ours is.
Yeah. Prices that we've seen in the Commission survey that was put on the record as Exhibits 1A and 1B, that prices in Saskatchewan and Manitoba seem to differ from those in other provinces only for the larger plans. Do you have a view on why that is?
As we talked about earlier, there are demographic factors at play. So, Western markets tend to have a younger demographic, example being Alberta for sure, Saskatchewan, Manitoba also. They do tend to consume more, and so we find that the bigger data plans sell better in those markets.
And you did, in responses to the Commission RFI in July of 2019, I'm looking at your response to question 209 regarding whether you agree that mobile wireless penetration and mobile wireless data usage is lower in Canada than other jurisdictions. You, as I understand your response, the number one factor might actually be the extent to which a consumer has access to fixed broadband networks such as Wi-Fi. Is that right?
That's correct. I think Canadians on average have access to Wi-Fi something in the range of 61% of the day versus other jurisdictions. One we looked at was Finland, and they were at 41%. So again, that may explain differences in usage to the extent that there are.
Some may say that the reason for the difference in usage is that the mobile wireless data prices are so high that consumers are looking to consume their data through Wi-Fi.
Yeah, I think just to respond to that question, I mean, number one, Rob's made the point about Wi-Fi, but I think we introduced the no overage plans back in June, and I would tell you that we've seen a substantial change in data usage patterns for our consumers. So I'm not sure.
Meaning that they're using more data?
Absolutely, and Mirko spoke about that earlier in terms of we don't really have a problem there in that we've seen on average over the last 3 years, consumers have doubled the amount of data they're using, and we see at least a 30% increase in data consumption every year, even before we introduced unlimited plans. Now we've introduced unlimited plans. We are seeing people to whom that was important, we're seeing them switch. And again, the earlier point made, there's a couple million Canadians, we believe, on unlimited plans today, but they've elected there. Of course, we still offer no plans with overage, and there are other consumers who continue to choose those plans. So we were seeing an increase in data usage previously.
Okay, so where you said before that most subscribers do not use the full extent of their data, now you'd say that you're seeing far more usage of data.
Well, I think you've seen a couple of things over the years. I mean, first and foremost, we've been watching people optimize their data buckets for many years. I mean, I've sat in this room and talked at wireless code hearings about how people were using data, whether it was they were pooling their data across multiple users, they were using the self-serve tools we provided to monitor data usage, or they were using Wi-Fi service. So there's a variety of things that people have done over time to optimize their data usage. As a result, we look at our data overage, but people, quite frankly, when we look at the customers who are choosing unlimited today, I often say they're buying insurance. I'd like to buy the unlimited plan because I don't want to have to think about it. And I'm willing to actually spend more than I have in my current plan, even though there's many other plans within our suite of lineups and brands that would satisfy their needs. They're actually choosing to change their rate plan.
And
I think if I could just add
go
to that.
ahead.
Yeah, I back to your question about how people who are offloading to Wi-Fi and relative percentages compared to other countries, and if that's a function of pricing. I think in Canada, our consumers consumers have a range of options, and they make their choices. And you're just, in our case, talking about unlimited. You'll see if you compare us to some of the others, we all have unlimited plans. We haven't had as many customers shift over those unlimited plans as for some other providers, because our customers are making their choices. We are serving every single type of customer, from Lucky Mobile to Virgin to Bell, and within each of those brands we have different options, and then the customers can make their choice. Do I want to buy insurance, or do I not want to buy insurance? Do I have access to Wi-Fi 80% or 61% of the time, or 20% of the time? Those are all decisions you make. So why spend the $75 for insurance you don't need if you're working from home and have access to Wi-Fi all day long? Maybe then you take the $45 Virgin plan with, however, is it 6 gigs? So those are the choices you get to make. That's a good thing. I think what we're doing here is, okay, because 60% versus 40% are choosing Wi-Fi and unlimited plans are creating, I mean, those are just those are data points, but you got to take a step back and look at the overall trends. Same thing with pricing. And we've talked about a price increase in Quebec on January 10th. That's a point in time. You have to look at a period of time. And clearly the evidence shows that over a relatively short but healthy period of time, prices in Canada are declining rapidly, and there's more and more value being delivered, and certainly far more competitive, I would say, than in 2015 when it was competitive and the Commission said, now's not the right time. And I say, again, now's not the right time.
Are you seeing any change in the amount of your subscribers that are paying data overage charges? So I note that in response to question 211 of our May 24th RFI, you indicated that between 40 and 50% of your subscribers paid data overage charges in 2018. Do you still have that same percentage of customers paying data overage charges?
Yeah, I think in general, if you're looking for more specific answers, we'll do that as an undertaking, and I think that might have been in one of your questions for March the 10th that you actually did ask us to do. So we'll absolutely take that as an undertaking. But in general, yes, as I spoke earlier, customers are using tools to optimize data in their plan. They're sharing data, and they're choosing to go to bigger bucket plans. So in general, yes, we are seeing a decline in data overage.
So just so I understand clearly, you would consider a data overage charge where the customer has a limit on their plan but uses your online tools to purchase an additional amount of data at a certain price?
Yes, I think assuming a consumer paid one of our plan fees and it included 4 gig, when they go beyond 4, they have access to buy one-time data plans. Anything that would sort of count, I would say, for the $50 data overage charge that's included in the wireless code. So absolutely consistent with that definition.
And if they just go over their data as opposed to picking up one of those plans, is the pricing different?
We give customers a variety of options, but yes, should that customer choose to take a one-time data pass, again, what we do, just so you have the full context, is when customers are at 95% of their data bucket, we notify them. We give them a warning. At any point in time, they can go into one of our self-serve tools and they can actually see where they are, what their consumption is relative to their monthly plan. So I think what we try to do for our consumers is give them tools and also notifications to let them know what actions they should choose to take or they may choose to take. So that's the first thing. Then customers can act. They can add a one-time data plan. They can change their actual rate plan, should they choose to, if they realize that, hey, my data usage has changed and it's not a one-time event. This is an ongoing event. Or if they think that it's more beneficial to them, they may just go into regular data usage charges, which are clearly laid out for them.
If I could just come back to usage for a minute, because
Sure.
again, it's important that you have it on the record. And I just want to point you to some of our confidential filings. You asked for very granular information about our data overage revenues, and we filed those in confidence. And if you look at them, you will see a very significant decline in data overage revenues, which will continue with the introduction of unlimited plans. And I think Rogers has spoken about that publicly in their quarterly results, but we filed ours in confidence with you, and it does show material declines.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about network quality. In your view, to what extent do networks differ in quality across Canada?
Well, Margaret did a study of network quality and its impact on regional price differences, so it might make sense to have Margaret speak to you about her findings.
Thank you. So we worked with public data on network speeds, upload speeds, download speeds, latency, or pings per millisecond. And with that public information about that covers a variety of regions, different cities in the country, and different carriers, we found there were considerable differences with respect to network quality across carriers and across geographies. And that became an important explanation for observed differences in wireless plan prices that had previously been attributed to the exercise of market power, which in fact we found working with the 2018 data and also earlier data were in fact more likely to be explained by differences in network quality across carriers and across geographies. There's sort of multiple examples of that. If you think of, which we covered in our May report, so the first type of example is just within a carrier, they offer different options that are at different price points that give you a lower price option for a lower network quality experience. So if you think about the quality premium that you might pay to have Virgin, for instance, versus Lucky service, and that exists across all the different national carriers. That's one example. There, in 2018, we reported on another example between carriers within a single geography. If you looked at the difference in network quality and price between Freedom and Bell, in both Toronto and Ottawa, as example, you saw very significant differences in the quality, the network quality experience with Freedom. And because of those lower quality characteristics in 2018, there was a significant price difference that was also evident. And then in Exhibit 1 of our January 2020 report, we provide you with the landscape of different network speeds that you see across carriers by geography. And you can see from that, now that again is 2018 data, but you can see from that not only do you have differences in between carriers, so that at that time Freedom, Videotron, and SaskTel's network speeds were considerably lower than the network speeds for the national carriers, but it's also the case that even within a given national carrier, the lower network speeds in 2018 for a company like Bell were in places like Saskatchewan relative to, say, Alberta. Some of those things will have changed over time because of additional investments that companies have been making, but that's what that study was based on.
But when I look at Table 1 and 3 of your study, where you lay out some data from PCMag, the network performance in the province of Quebec does not appear to be inferior when compared to other areas. So I'm having trouble understanding how that affects.
So I think you should look at Exhibit 1 of our January 2020 report, because that's where you'll see, and there you can compare Montreal again by carrier compared to other cities, and it depends on the carrier you choose that you're making the comparison against. But even if you looked at that, if you compared those to, say, Edmonton, well, actually, I guess Edmonton has somewhat lower, but if you compared them to Toronto and a variety of other download speeds by city, you can see you can see how the differences compare. And at least in the context of Videotron's speeds in Montreal at that time, they were considerably lower than their speeds in other, well, than you see for the national carriers, for Bell and for TELUS in Montreal.
But if you look at the PC Mag speed tests, Rogers prices, wouldn't they then be lower in most parts of Canada because their network speeds were lower as compared to Bell and TELUS?
So I might just jump in for a second and then give Margaret a chance to follow up. But I think what you see in Margaret's analysis is an attempt to do an economic analysis across a variety of factors and a variety of cases. Right. It's similar in that way to what Dr. Chipty did in her report. You got to aggregate. We're trying to make some conclusions out of a very complex set of facts and a complex set of markets. And so I don't think Margaret's analysis says, and certainly we don't think it's true that you can in any one case pick one case and say that has to follow the aggregate trend that the economic analysis shows across all markets. And we talked about Quebec earlier and some of the unique demand factors in Quebec that may be influencing market activity there, and there are a variety of factors in every market. But standing back and looking at the Competition Bureau's position, which is why Margaret did this analysis in the first place, was to address the position of the Competition Bureau, which was they were trying to draw a simple conclusion from differences in prices between provinces, that it had to be based on market power. And I think what Margaret's analysis shows is that you can explain all the difference in the same way they're explaining it based on network quality. And the other thing is that when Margaret first did this analysis, those differences between provinces were sometimes in the range of $35 or $40 price differences, which have now narrowed to sort of no more than $10. And given the unique factors in Quebec, the net effect of all that evidence is that there's no way to draw a conclusion about market power from those small differences in prices between provinces.
Yeah, I think too, we also have to give credit to the work that Videotron has done. It's an example of a very successful regional carrier. And when I think about when they first launched in that Quebec market, there was a variety of things that were very different. First of all, they didn't have access to the iPhone. Their network quality was not equal to Bell's. And they priced very aggressively to drive market share quickly. As they got iPhone, as they launched their LTE network, and we looked at the risk again to our consumers, we adapted Bell's pricing strategy. If you go back in history in that market, when they initially launched, we were competing largely with our Virgin Mobile brand against them. But as they gained strength, we felt that was a bigger competitive threat for us, and so the market condition changed. And I think, you can look across every region and geography and say, what is the market condition and the competitive rivalry, and what are the conditions for competition? And Quebec is a great example of where a regional carrier has really risen to the occasion. And I think that if we put them at risk, as we said earlier, they now contribute a third of all the net additions in Canada. So they have their feet firmly planted on the ground and have made us better.
Okay, but getting back to the example of Rogers and their network speeds. So their pricing across the country seems to be very similar to Bell's, even though according to this PC Mag speed test, their speeds would be lower. So can you explain how that fits in with your analysis?
I think network quality and its correlation to pricing differences, is it one way of explaining pricing differences, just like Dr. Chipty's economic theory that when a regional entrant acquires somewhere between 5.5% and 20% market share, there's an impact on pricing. And no disrespect to the experts in the room, but I think it's not as simple either way. There's not one single explanation. Probably the best explanation is the competitive intensity that exists in the marketplace. And I should note that the Bureau at paragraph 139 of its submission after going through its analysis of regional price differences, again, using older data, it then said that prices in regions with and without a strong regional competitor are converging. And that's consistent with our evidence that this price competition that the regional entrants are providing is benefiting all consumers, even those consumers that aren't situated within a regional carrier's footprint. And you saw that in your exhibit that you came up with and showed the sort of uniformity of rack rate pricing. It's showing that even though Freedom may not be in a particular town in Ontario, if you're a Bell customer, you're getting the benefit of the competitive intensity Freedom delivered by being able to now buy a 10 gig unlimited plan from Bell. So all of those factors are at work. It's not just one explanation.
Okay. And in fairness, when you are doing your pricing for your flanker brands like Lucky and Virgin, I think you said that you're offering lower speeds, the network experience is not the same as with the higher gigabyte plans. So you would take that into account in setting your pricing.
Yes, we look at how our three brands work to cover the various different market conditions and customer segments.
Does your network quality vary significantly by location in Canada?
Bruce, do you want to speak to that?
The design goals are the same across the country. There are challenges in rural areas, so you don't get the peak speeds that we normally see, but we maintain a consistent level of design goal across the country.
Okay. And how does branding and brand recognition influence your pricing decisions?
So, I think it is our goal, and obviously it was when we launched Lucky Mobile just a little over 2 years ago, to make sure that we look at the various different market segments and what we're trying to do and trying to accomplish in that market segment. If I use Lucky Mobile again, we were really not participating in that part of the market. We felt that it was a gap for us, an opportunity that we launched in December 2017. And if you look at our recent results on prepaid, we think that we've obviously closed a gap for us and increased the market competitiveness in that space. We obviously look at all of the brands, not just on their brand recognition and brand identity, but the wholeness of what they bring to the market. With Bell, you have wireless service, you have home internet, you have television, home phones, smart home services. Right. And so it's more than just brand recognition. It's all of the aspects that we look at to differentiate each one of our brands from one another and from our competition.
So when the Commission did a survey recently, respondents in talking about or responding to questions about using flanker brands seemed to be unclear about who the flanker brands belong to. So we got responses saying that, well, I don't trust the quality. Do you let potential customers know who want to have a lower cost alternative that Lucky brand is a Bell brand or Virgin is a Bell brand?
The point of us having the three different brands is to appeal to different market segments, and they each have their independent voices to the consumers we target. Lucky is targeted towards new Canadians and value-conscious Canadians. Virgin is targeted at kind of the young at heart, and Bell, as Claire indicated, is kind of families and whole households. We talk about network characteristics on each of these brands, but we don't reference another brand. It makes more sense for us to have distinct offerings for each of those.
So if I go on a Bell Mobility website and I'm looking for a lower cost plan, there's nothing that would say, oh, you want a lower cost plan, check out Lucky.
There wouldn't be a reference to Lucky on the Bell site, but we do have lower cost plans available on Bell as well. So, when we talk to people in store or on the website, there are prepaid offerings on Bell Mobility and share plans and multi-line discounts that help address affordability for those subscribers. It's in a different way than Lucky does it, but we work on, addressing all of those price points on each of the brands.
Yeah, I think it's important. We talk about what we do within our brands to have the various different disciplines to differentiate them from one another. I mean, when we talk about Bell, it's absolutely about delivering the highest quality of network to our consumers, right? And we talk about that very openly, and that's our headline message is with Bell you get Canada's best network. With Virgin you get member benefits. With Lucky you get affordability, as Martin said. They're quite simply, as I opened with earlier, there's trade-off decisions that consumers need to make, and we have to stay disciplined with regards to Bell speaks to Bell, Virgin is to Virgin, and Lucky is to Lucky.
I'm thinking of the concerns that Canadians have expressed about lower cost alternatives. And for example, a senior citizen who their entire life had a Bell landline, and now they're getting into the cell phone market, and they don't know that Bell offers something low-cost, occasional use, without understanding that connection. So don't you think that would be an important connection to make for them?
So just on the Bell brand, as I talked to before, we do provide multiple options, but each of the brands has got very wide distribution. Lucky Mobile, we've gotten the word out about Lucky Mobile in the space of 2 years to a huge number of Canadians. You can get it in places that you otherwise wouldn't have been able to get wireless service in the past, like Dollarama. There's 1,500 places where in the past you would never be able to buy wireless. I know a lot of people who go to Dollarama, including senior citizens, and you run into it at Dollarama and never realize that it was possible to get something like that. And lo and behold, you can buy your product there. So it's not just about featuring it on one website or another. It's about the full awareness picture that we tackle to that we try to get across to people.
And you talked a little bit about that paragraph 36 and the promotional activity, paragraph 36 in your opening remarks. So how accurate a measure do you think actual transaction prices are the posted prices?
Well, I think at any given point in time, if you went to a store today or you visited our websites, you would see that there's a tremendous number of discounts or options available for consumers beyond just the rate plan price. I, in fact, asked that question recently of our team, and I said, what percentage of our total new activations or hardware upgrades are receiving a promotional discount? I know you've asked for that to be filed in confidence as an undertaking, so we'll do that. But I can tell you that almost half of our consumers today on the Bell brand, as an example, are coming on a share plan. Share plans today offer a $10 discount in the market. So if you just take that, it's easily more than half of all consumers are receiving some form of a promotional discount just on their service pricing alone, let alone the hardware and various related hardware promotions that go along with that, such as gift cards.
And turning to Dr. Sanderson, then, I understand that you used posted prices instead of transaction prices. So how do you think that would affect your findings if you use the transaction prices?
So we worked with wireless posted prices because we had to collect prices from competitors, and so transaction prices with all the discounts are not obvious. They're highly confidential. They're not posted. I don't think it would affect the finding that we had, because you can think of the posted prices as a bit of a list price from which there's promotional activity that then occurs. So as long as it's the case that the discounting and the promotional activity that occurs is similar across different geographies, which I would expect it certainly would be. It's not going to be the case that it would refute the finding that network quality was an important explanation for differences that existed in 2018 between carriers, different carriers and different geographies.
So again, some context for why Margaret's evidence is the way it is. We asked Margaret to do that analysis to respond to the Competition Bureau's evidence, and you can see that in their May filing. Again, that price differences between provinces, they said in their May filing, is an evidence of some sort of problem for the Commission to solve. And given everything we've said about how competitive the market is, it didn't seem right to us that there was any sort of competition problem in any market in Canada. And so we asked Margaret to look on the same basis that the Competition Bureau did, which was at posted prices, and see what the explanation for that was. So again, I think it's always important to keep it in context. Like, we're trying to respond to a point that the Competition Bureau made, which was sort of counterintuitive given the level of competitive intensity we've described in the market.
Parties have submitted that there's lower data usage per month in Canada as compared to other countries. Do you, Dr. Sanderson, accept that as a accurate assessment?
So I think what you would find is that data usage is highly correlated with the level of and the take-up of unlimited data plans. And so what I think you would find is that places, if the comparisons, for instance, between the United States and Canada that have been made, particularly using data usage statistics from 2018, which is what I believe a lot of those comparisons are making use of, there would have been, at that time, there wasn't the same take-up of unlimited data plans in Canada as there was in the United States. They're a more recent offering here. And as a result, I would fully expect that data usage, as has already been described, in Canada is going to be very quickly at levels that you see in the United States, given the higher take-up of unlimited data plans.
So when you have higher priced data limited plans, you'll have lower data usage. And when you introduce the unlimited plans, you'll get higher data usage. Is that accurate?
No, I don't think it's, sorry, what I want to say is that those statistics are based on an average across all plans, and so what you see when people have said there's lower data usage in Canada, that based on 2018 data, that reflects the fact that there weren't as many unlimited data plans in Canada at that time relative to the United States. And now that there are more unlimited data plans available in Canada and the take-up is increased, you're going to see higher data usage. I think, to go back to Quebec as another example, that's the counter argument to the counter example to the argument that the reason you have lower data usage is somehow reflective of higher prices. Instead, what we see in Quebec is, even for, we certainly saw this in the Bell data, that for Bell subscribers that have data plans, even for those subscribers, data usage in Quebec is lower for taste reasons or demand reasons or some other reason.
But not for network quality reasons then?
Not for network quality reasons, and not because prices are too high, because people have already talked about Quebec as being a location, and your own recent survey shows that it's a location where there are lower posted prices.
And why do you think...
Sorry, Madam Commissioner, just on the usage point, part of the issue, I think, in terms of the record of the proceeding is the data that most people are looking at is somewhat dated. And Margaret's referring to 2018 data. And if you look at current data, and we filed data with you in confidence about usage, but the data she's using is 2 or 3 years old. If you look at average gigabit used in 2017, it's up 23%, just 17 to 18. So I think it's indisputable that usage is now increasing. And I would point you to, again, some of our confidential filings showing between 2018 and 2019, the amount of which usage grew on our network, and it is eye-popping. So again, I think as you've seen the introduction of unlimited, as you've seen competitive intensity increase, usage is increasing. And when you're thinking about regulatory remedies, I think you have to look forward rather than in the rearview mirror to what are the trends showing you going forward.
Okay.
Prices are dropping, usage is increasing, penetration's climbing. So I think those are the factors you have to look at.
Again, to Dr. Sanderson, when we look at concentration in a given industry, the Commission has historically used market share. You used the Herfindahl-Hirschman Index. So I'm just wondering, did you have a particular reason why you used the HAI as a measure of competition, not market share of the regional competitors, for example?
So there's some characteristics about, there's some technical characteristics about the Herfindahl-Hirschman Index which make it a preferable index because it gives you, for measuring market concentration, relative to just, say, measuring the share of the top 4 players in an industry, because it gives you information about differences in the sizes of individual competitors. So you might, for instance, have a situation where, let's say, the top 4 firms in an industry have an 80% share, but they each have 20% market share. That's a less concentrated industry than a situation where the top 4 firms have exactly the same total share of 80%, but one of those firms is 50% and the others make up the remaining 30, you would get a much higher HHI. And we expect that in an industry that has a single firm that has a very, very high share and other firms that it competes against which have much lower shares, that will be a more concentrated industry and will have a higher HHI value. And typically, we would expect in economics that it might be the type of industry that might encourage higher prices relative to a situation that there's a more dispersed or more equal set of shares among players. That gives you a lower HHI.
And you mentioned that an increase of HAI put upward pressure on prices, but that this does not necessarily confirm the exercise of market power. So I'm wondering if you could unpack that for us.
So you do tend to, I guess, as an initial first principle, we would think that increases in concentration, what we often talk about is the difference between sort of upward pressure on price versus whether you could actually achieve that. What's your ability to actually take prices up? And that will depend on, ultimately, companies' ability to increase prices depends on the options that are available to consumers and the ease with which consumers can switch to alternative providers and the ease with which alternative providers, rivals, can service those customers. And so one of the things that's quite interesting about wireless relative to a lot of other industries is people talk about churn rates. Of course, that's all about customers switching. So it's an industry where there's tremendous customer mobility and a lot of switching between rivals. So it's a place that makes it easy for customers to move around. And it's also relatively straightforward from a capacity perspective for a single rival or a single firm, a single wireless carrier to then take on a new customer. There's no significant capacity constraints that would prevent Bell from servicing a new subscriber that comes over from Rogers, for example. And so then the ultimate effect of all of that is that that ends up meaning that even with the same, in that set of industry characteristics, with the same HHI relative to, say, an industry where customers are under sort of committed to committed to a given rival, committed to a given company. There's not a lot of movement of customers. It's far more difficult for firms to then actually try to raise prices or to hold prices higher than they would otherwise be in a competitive environment, or to market inferior products to customers. Those are just going to be things that are very, very, very difficult to do in wireless.
You indicated that HHI in Canada is lower than in many other countries in the world. So, in your view, does this preclude market power existing in Canada?
I don't think it precludes market power from existing. I think it's really important to talk about what is the definition of market power.
Right.
So one of the things, the way that regulators and I think competition authorities have thought about market power is that it's as I just said, it's the if a single firm is able to market inferior products at higher prices without customers switching and avoiding those inferior products at higher prices, that would be a situation that would give you evidence that that firm has market power. That's quite different than, I mean, economists can have this textbook or technical definition of market power, which is that price exceeds marginal cost, which they think about as a perfectly competitive market. In wireless, you're always going to have price exceeding marginal cost because the fixed costs of providing services are enormous. There's huge investments, capital costs. It's always going to be an industry that there's going to be 30 firms offering wireless services. There's always going to be a few firms. And in that situation, I think it's important not to think about this definition of market power to be what I've described, which is this that a firm would be able to act independent of its rivals.
And when you talk about a relevant geographic market, you used national HHIs as opposed to provincial. Is there a reason for that?
Actually, we in the regression analysis that we did, where we were looking at differences across provinces and carriers, we used HHI at the provincial level. So that in the regression analysis, HHI is used at the provincial level because that's the level of aggregation that the wireless plan prices were being used. In the report that talks about the comparison internationally, that was giving you a comparison of national HHI levels in Canada at sort of, again, somewhat, as has already been pointed out, the data is a little bit dated because the report was filed in May. But that gave you a comparison relative to international examples of countries that had mandated MVNO access and how concentrated were their industries at the time that they mandated MVNO access. And there I think it's really important to actually use HHI because many of those countries that were in a situation that they mandated MVNO access had a single carrier that had very, very high share, and which is quite different than the situation that exists in Canada.
Okay. In your view, what level of HHI does market power exist?
So there's no bright line. It basically depends on what your purpose is, I suppose, as to how you're thinking about how concentrated are you going to evaluate the market. So as I just said, the wireless industry is going to be a market that's going to be more concentrated than a retail sector is going to be because of the characteristics of the industry. What the comparisons show you, the international comparisons show you, is that the level of industry concentration for wireless in Canada is far less than it is in many of the countries that felt that their wireless sectors, were so concentrated that they needed to adopt a mandated MVNO access to resolve a competition problem.
And are there any other factors that you would take into account in assessing market power?
So I think maybe I'm just going to jump in for 1 second because I think this is a really important issue that you're exploring, and I think we want to be helpful to you in the decision making that you need to do. And the chair explored this with Dr. Chipty yesterday. How do we define market power? And we've put forward a definition in the course of this proceeding. When asked about market power in, I think it was the July RFIs number 205. And it's a definition that's been adopted by European regulators for a similar purpose that the Commission is pursuing, and that's the power of a firm to behave independently of its competitors. In other words, you have market power if you don't have to respond to competitive activity from other competitors in the market, or as Margaret said, you can offer inferior products with no consequence because you don't have effective competitors competing with you. And we think it's clearly not the case that the Canadian wireless market exhibits that characteristic. And the chair asked Dr. Chipty whether her findings rule out market power in any particular area. And I think she rightly said she just didn't do the type of analysis that can rule out market power because she was comparing two areas. And that makes sense if you're doing the Competition Bureau's day-to-day job of determining the potential impact on prices of any given merger. You would do that type of analysis, but obviously we understand the Commission needs to make a decision about whether there's market power in a market because there's regulatory consequences that flow from that. So we've tried to put forward a definition that can help you do that, and I think everything you've heard from us today about competition in the market shows that there's no sort of evidence at all, or there can never be evidence that that there's market power in markets in Canada by that commonly used definition.
Thank you. When we look at the Bureau's analysis, Dr. Sanderson, I think in your reply, you indicate that the regression you ran on Bell's data show that Bell's ARPU is negatively correlated with Freedom's introduction of their big gig plan, and not with regional provider penetration that was the finding in the Matrix study. Is that accurate in terms of your position?
So I'll try and unpack it. We worked with the Bell data that was submitted and used by Dr. Chipty, and to try to understand the result that is reported in the Matrix report about how when a regional carrier reaches a particular penetration threshold of 5.5% in a given CMA, that once it crosses that threshold, that leads to a reduction in plan limit adjusted prices as that concept was defined. And I just want to pause for a second to speak about what that is. The plan limit adjusted price is ARPU divided by the average data limit, and that's what that is. And what we found working with the Bell data is what we wanted to understand is how important was it that it was regional carrier penetration above this threshold that resulted in this change versus what appeared to be the case from the difference in differences findings that are also in the Matrix report, that it's a response to the Freedom Big Gig and the new plan offering. And what we found is working with the Bell data, and it's a fairly simple test. We said, well, why don't we just look at the data for Bell before the Big Gig offer? Because at that time, there's variation in the regional carriers' penetration, and there's some CMAs that have regional carrier penetration of 0, and there's some that have levels that are below 5.5%, and there's some that are at levels of 10 or 15%. So there's enough variation if we just look at the sample before the Big Gig offer. And let's just run the same thing and see whether or not increasing regional penetration drives this reduction in ARPU and this increase in average plan limits. And basically what you see is you see it's flat. So you can increase regional carrier penetration above 5.5% up to 10 or 15%, and you don't find that changes Bell's average plan limit or Bell's ARPU. But if we change the sample and then we look at the sample including after Freedom's Big Gig offer, what we find is that what ultimately happens is that's a new offer that comes out into the market that's very attractive to consumers. In the case of Bell, they provide new plans that come out into the marketplace that have higher data limits available. So as the new plans come out that have larger data packages, that increases the average data limit. You've now increased the denominator in this plan limit adjusted prices, and that's what's ultimately driving the effect. So in some ways,
but it is because you've had a fourth entrant come in and offer a plan that you're responding to.
It's absolutely because of facilities-based competition. It's 100% because of facilities-based competition and rivalry between the carriers.
Okay. I'll just have one more question, perhaps, before break, Mr. Chairman. I just want to close the loop on a question that we asked Dr. Chipty yesterday related to the fact that TELUS didn't provide information in response to a commission's RFI. And in your view, does the lack of that TELUS data at the CMA level in the study make a difference?
Well, I think what it means is you always, whenever you look at any study, you have to think about the data that went into it. So, what it means is that the results that are found from that study are based off of Bell and Rogers data. And I think the other thing to remember about the data that goes into that study is that, as Dr. Chipty explained yesterday, it's an average revenue per subscriber. So it's the type of data that can't distinguish how wireless plan prices might be priced differently because they have different data packages amounts or they have different quality attributes or that type of thing. So I do think it's important to think about the data and the sample that's used to then when you're evaluating the conclusions that derive from that.
And would you be willing to file the underlying data used for the studies that were referenced in the report filed May 15th, 2019 and January 13th, 2020, the data from PC Mag and the speed test studies to assess network quality throughout Canada and other jurisdictions?
Yes.
Great, thank you. I think this might be a good time to break, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Leisner. Let's take a 15-minute break, resuming at 11. Thank you. Please continue, Madame la Secrétaire, or Commissioner Leisner. Go ahead.
Hello again. I just wanted to ask you a few questions about the cost of spectrum. So would you agree with the proposition that the cost of spectrum in Canada is higher than in other jurisdictions?
Yes.
And what does that mean in terms of how it affects mobile wireless prices or your company profitability?
Oh, it certainly has an impact on overall cost structures and pricing. So, and I answered quickly, yes, but there's two components to it.
Right.
So there's the spectrum auction prices get driven up because of some of the conditions that are put around the auctions to assist the fourth carriers in the country, and those were policy decisions that were made back in 2007 and so on. And it's not going to rehash all those things. We are 12 years later, and the fourth carriers have solidified their position in the network, but not to the point where I think we can take the significant risks that would fall upon them if there were MVNOs. But the fact is those auction structures have created an increase in auction prices. And then there's the other component, which is for the spectrum that was not auctioned or for which the initial license terms post-auction have expired, there are spectrum license fees that the government imposes, and our fees in Canada are much exponentially higher than in most other countries, the annual license fees. So there's those two components, and it does affect overall cost structure. It does affect pricing, ultimately. Everything does.
How do you measure how much spectrum you have and you need?
Bruce, do you want to walk through that?
Well, when spectrum becomes available, we certainly need to have it to grow. We've acquired spectrum at every opportunity, and at this point, all of the spectrum we have in the GTA, for instance, is in service. The peak speeds that we talk about of 1.4 gigabits a second to a phone is a result of carrier aggregating 4 significant channels together. And in addition to that, all the other spectrum we have in the GTA is currently operational. So we put everything in play as we model looking forward. We fully expect to grow into 5G spectrum and use that to contain the tremendous growth that we're seeing.
Given your comments on the competition in the market, do you expect that there will be other new entrant carriers in the mobile wireless market in the next 5 years?
Well, there have been auction structures that have given players opportunity to come forward beyond just the fourth wireless players that we see in the market today. And to the extent that those auction structures continue to exist, others will have an opportunity to come in and purchase spectrum.
Do you think another potential entrant would be able to acquire enough spectrum to launch a competitive national wireless mobile network?
Why does it have to be national? I mean, it's the way. I mean, we have very strong competitors today in the form of Shaw, Videotron, Eastlink, ExploreNet starting to take root in Manitoba. None of those are national. So if you ask me if the word national is important to the question, then kind of difficult to answer that one. The answer is no, not national, but can strong regional competitors that are Canadian-based and already own telecom facilities come into the market? I think yes.
Okay. All right, let's talk about seamless roaming. So we heard, and I'm sure you heard the comments of both Shaw and ExploreNet yesterday, and I think Shaw described it as seamless roaming being a 30-year problem with a $100 fix. So what are your views on that?
We thought that comment was somewhat trite. It's not as simple as Shaw portrayed it. And Bruce can walk you through just what would be involved from a technical standpoint and a cost standpoint in implementing seamless roaming.
Do you disagree with what Shaw said would be involved technically in order to provide seamless roaming to some of these regional carriers? We
think it's more complicated than how Shaw portrayed it, and Bruce can walk you through exactly how it would work if it had to be implemented.
Yeah, yesterday we got the impression that it's just simple a matter of a little bit of data fill down associated with the site in Brockville. And, in reality, it would be mapping the perimeter of their network all the way from Brockville up Highway 416, around their coverage footprint in Ottawa, back down 416, and all the way around the perimeter of their network down.
That would be the setting up the architecture?
That would be, yes, correct.
And that's a one-time?
Initially, it would be set up where the sectors that would hand off would have to be established, but as the network changed, then they would have to be revisited. There have to be network facilities between our switches. There would have to be the protocols in the switches changed. There's no standard for this, so these are proprietary implementations between vendors. There would be billing system changes. And again, it would have to be monitored. And then reasonably, we don't do data fill and put it in service. Those things would all be tested. So thousands of sector pairs would have to be tested before we would go into service.
If I may as well. There's also a broader competition point to be made here when we talk about all these things, but including seamless handoff. The reason a call drops in those cases and doesn't automatically transfer from one network to another is because you're moving from one network to another. So you have a provider who's invested in their own network, and the caller has reached the limits of that network, and the call drops. We then don't prevent the call from reconnecting once the customer re-engages, because we don't, and because there are roaming rules. But at some point when you say, okay, now we're going to mandate roaming so everyone gets access to the 3 carrier networks, and now we're going to do seamless handoff, you have to ask yourself, do we want to eliminate all the points of differentiation between networks through regulation? We don't invest just for the sake of investing. We actually invest to differentiate our networks from others. You talked a lot this morning about speed as one potential differentiator, but there's also coverage, and there's also other elements of network quality like dropped calls. Those matter. And the very first couple of questions you asked, which I answered, were all around our capacity to invest and how we make those trade-offs. There's also an element of our desire to invest, because the reason the regulatory model so far has directionally been supportive of investment. I say directionally because there are some things we don't like mandated roaming, and we don't like the price and all that, but it's still directionally supportive of investment. And that's why we keep investing, and we keep investing because the other guys who have come into the market have gotten better. Claire talked about it. As they went from what they were to LTE to LTE Advanced, and they got the iPhone, the price gap has narrowed. So now we say, okay, we want to invest again to be better than they are. But then we have situations where we have mandated roaming. Now we're discussing seamless handoff, which is eliminating another point of differentiation under the ISED rules, not CRTC rules, but under the ISED rules, you have the big 3 permitted to roam on each other.
So you have seamless roaming for Bell, Rogers, and
No, I mean
Telus.
roaming. We do not have seamless roaming as between Bell and Rogers. I'm back to roaming.
Okay.
Just the incidental roaming, that the garden variety roaming.
So you don't have
about.
seamless roaming with Rogers?
No, we don't.
You have it with Telus, obviously, right?
No.
No?
Because we have each other. That we have our own network, so we don't have. There's no seamless handoffs. You're on your own network when on our network, on our shared network. We're on our own network. With Rogers is permitted to roam on Bell, but when a Rogers subscriber roams on Bell, they don't get the benefit of seamless handoff. It's an important point. They do not.
So they would experience the same dropped call issue that Shaw expressed and ExploreNet expressed, exactly the same issue?
Yes, they just experience it less because they have a larger network, so it doesn't happen in as many places.
And there may be overlap.
Of course, there's a lot of overlap. So in Brockville, they have their own network. They don't fall off their own and onto ours.
Right.
In Algonquin Park, for example, Rogers would roam many times on Bell network or in northern Newfoundland, and then when they reach the limit of their network, the call drops, they reconnect on the Bell network.
So when Shaw and ExploreNet say that when they approach an MNO and the conversation is a complete non-starter, and I think that Shaw mentioned approaching Bell, that is because you wish not to have seamless roaming because it's a competitive advantage not to have that. Is that
Correct.
correct?
Yeah. I mean, I dispute the words non-starter because there are discussions, but have we reached agreement on that? No. And why? Because it's a key point of differentiation for us.
So, all right, you disagree with them saying that there was simply not an opportunity to open the conversation. So can you tell us more about what the negotiation process was?
Well, no.
Okay. You don't know it?
Oh, I do know it. I do know it. But there are many things discussed all the time across carriers on
Right.
very narrowly on roaming, but broader issues, and then it comes on the table, and we haven't agreed on that. And the reason we don't agree on the seamless handoff point, and we've agreed on many other things with various players, is because of the point of differentiation.
So would you be willing to negotiate an arrangement with a regional carrier for seamless roaming?
Well,
I mean, we're looking at, the state of the wireless market.
I almost feel like if I say no because I want to retain my point of differentiation, then they may be faced with a regulatory mandate to do it, in which case we lose our point of differentiation. So it's a difficult one to answer. We haven't been willing to do that to date for the legitimate reasons I hope I've conveyed.
Okay. What about network sharing agreements? Have you been approached by any of the regional MNOs to enter into a network sharing agreement?
We have not been approached by any of the regional carriers.
And would you be willing to negotiate a network sharing agreement with a regional carrier?
Well, the network sharing agreements that we have, it's actually network reciprocity is what we actually call it. And it's because when we come to an agreement like this, each party brings something to the table that makes it a worthwhile commercial arrangement for all the parties involved. And they're commercially negotiated. So when Bell and Telus came to our network reciprocity agreement, the agreement was that we would each build and contribute capital and contribute spectrum to building a network. Similar kind of commercial negotiations around Saskatchewan and in Manitoba. So always willing to talk network reciprocity, but that's what it is. It's reciprocity.
Would you offer the same terms and conditions to a regional MNO who wanted to enter into a network sharing agreement that you have with TELUS, for example?
So the network sharing agreement we have with TELUS is undeniably pro-competitive. That's the first point I really want to have on the record. Yeah. But secondly, back to Martin's point, it's reciprocity. So it's two parties building, covering the same proportion of the geography, more or less, contributing spectrum in proportionate amounts, investing the same amounts of capital.
So
that's to say to offer those same terms to somebody else. Well, if somebody else can offer that reciprocity across the board, that's one thing. If they can't, then we wouldn't offer the same terms. No.
So would it be fair to say that in your view, a regional competitor would probably not be able to offer that reciprocity because you're already competing against them?
Well, not because we're competing against them, because of their asset mix.
Right. Right. But they're already there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Regional network reciprocity agreements have been struck, though. Right? There was one in Quebec, and in fact still operating, and there was one in Manitoba between Rogers and MTS. So it's, it does happen when the right commercial negotiation takes place.
Okay. I'm going to shift gears a little bit, talk a little bit more about low-cost plans and affordability. You've talked before the break about the promotion of your lower-cost plans. Do you have any studies or metrics that would show how effective the promotion of your lower-cost plans are?
Well, I think there would be a couple things. I mean, I think the first and the best measure of our low-cost plans is actually the take rate of the low-cost plans. the percentage of people that are choosing to use pay-per-use prepaid service, who are choosing Lucky Mobile service, and as I think you probably saw in our fourth quarter results, we are seeing significant evidence of our prepaid product offering, which is available at a low-cost, highly affordable space with no credit check required, with a very significant and positive response rate from the population.
And do you have training manuals or other documents that show how you train your sales representative with respect to these plans that you could undertake to provide?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think, we have numerous retail distribution points where we actually sell all of our products. You can look anywhere from Walmart to the Source to Best Buy, and we sell our entire suite of lineup. And when we train those individuals, obviously we're selling based on customer needs. That is a primary goal of all of our training manuals, and so we absolutely can share that with you as an undertaking.
Okay. There were suggestions by some of the interveners in this proceeding on the written record that the Commission should mandate low-cost plans, perhaps through a limited means-tested segment of the population. What are your views on that? Do you think that's feasible?
I'll ask Claire to comment in a minute, but just in terms of the actual plan that I think was put forward, it was somewhere in the range of $25 to $30 for a 4 gigabyte data plan. That particular plan, I think, is A, widely available in the market, and B, if it became effectively a regulated plan at a regulated price, it would have a distortive impact on the market. And I think you need to look at that proposal in light of what low-cost plans are available today. And our submission would be that that market is well covered, and Claire can take you through some of the low-cost options that are available. But I think that end of the market is being served. And we also, as you know, launched Lucky Mobile, and we launched a low-cost data-only plan in response to the Commission's desire to continue to open up the lower end of the market.
But there seems to be a disconnect because we have interveners representing, vulnerable Canadians who don't seem to be aware of the plans that you've just mentioned. So where's the gap there? Why aren't they aware? What is the problem with respect to promotion? Is there anything the Commission can do or that the carriers ought to do to make those plans more visible?
Well, I think I'd perhaps start with, yesterday you handed out a document and it highlighted those rate plans. They are visible on our website and in our points of distribution. In fact, if you use Lucky Mobile, we make our plan lineup available in retail. So I don't know if there's a problem with the visibility per se of those plans. I think one of the challenges I see just when I looked at the plans that were proposed, the plans that are requested at $25 to $30 with 4 gigabytes of data on the fastest speeds available, and in some instances device financing, they're just not realistic in today's market. In fact, you're asking for more data in those plans than the average Canadian uses. I think my history with research has been, if you ask people for what they want with no consequence, the sky is the limit. And I think this is an example is you've asked people how much they'd like to pay without saying what would the trade-off decision be. Those products, those price plans, you absolutely found them in your research. You absolutely could see them in the training that our retail reps have, and you absolutely would see them when you speak to one of our customer service agents in our call centers. So I don't think there's a problem with the access to low entry price point service plans in the Canadian market today.
If I may, as I'm listening to the series of questions especially for vulnerable Canadians, and I hear where you're coming from. So there's the access to the plans, and then there's the awareness of the plans, and we're talking about both. I'm not going to repeat our answers on the access because I think we have a lot of plans that can cater to various segments of the population, including for vulnerable Canadians. I think that That is a segment that we serve. On the awareness, as you explore awareness, I would just going to ask the Commission to keep in mind that, take for example the earlier question about why is the low-cost plan not more visible on the Bell website? Because a lot of the low-cost, we have Bell low-cost plans, but the majority of our low-cost plans are Lucky branded. We have an approach to our brand and our brand discipline that we will never put Lucky on the Bell brand on the Bell website, because that's the Bell brand. We won't have a Lucky brand, the Lucky brand inside a Bell store, but we have them in Wireless Wave,
Right.
T-Booth, Walmart, Dollarama. So,
But when you talk about low-cost plans on the Bell brand,
yes,
they're not at the same price point, obviously, as on the Lucky brand.
it depends on the package and what we're offering. One point of differentiation is Lucky Mobile's 3G, and the Bell low-cost plans are not 3G, so there'll be a price differentiation
Right.
by that fact alone.
They're more expensive. They're not at the same price point.
Well, some are, some aren't.
There are some similar price points. The offering is different and what's in them. But just from an awareness perspective, our Lucky Mobile, one of our brand promises or one of the slogans we use, if you're on the subway or anywhere else, you'll often see cheap plans starting at $15. We're not hiding the $15 plan. It's a key part of the marketing proposition. If you walk by a Virgin Mobile kiosk at the mall, it will say plans starting at $28. We have digital screens. It always has plans starting at $28. It is a key part to us bringing new subscribers into the market. So, we're not hiding the low cost, because it is a real source of new subscribers to us, and we market actively that message.
Commissioner Leisner, just coming back to, from a customer satisfaction standpoint, we did note that in your consumer research, you found that a majority of Canadians who agree they get good value for money from their cell phone provider have household incomes of under $40,000. So that suggests to us that collectively the industry is doing a better job in terms of addressing that market segment.
So, in a nutshell, your position would be that we ought not to mandate low-cost plans.
I think they exist.
Yeah. To what extent are customers denied access to postpaid plans on the basis of their credit rating?
So on postpaid, if you bring your own device, the credit requirements are actually quite low to be able to activate on a postpaid plan. If you're looking for us to finance the cost of a device, then the credit requirements are obviously linked to the value of that device and the individual subscriber's profile.
We asked yesterday about whether a model similar to ISED's Connecting Families initiative that's on the broadband side would be useful on the mobile wireless service front. What are your views on that?
I think those type of models are hard to design in a hearing room, but if you're looking for our willingness to participate in a program like that, we have participated in it on the broadband side, and I'm sure it's something we would be prepared to work with you on.
And do you, on your own initiative, have you introduced any programs such as the TELUS one, your own version of targeting a vulnerable, low-cost market? I think the TELUS program had to do with people under the age of 26 that were part of the child welfare system being offered a $0 plan for 2 years.
Yeah, I think we don't offer anything outside of our core three brands. We've talked about we offer Lucky and Virgin, and if I use Virgin as an example, we have very aggressive plans for them. If I use Virgin for $35, you have a plan with unlimited talk and text, or for $45, you can add data, but we don't specifically target that segment, no.
And what's your experience been with the lower cost data-only plans that were introduced following our telecom decision 2018-475?
There's been limited interest in them. Most people, do want to use, the starting point is typically talk and text on the phone, and then they add data as opposed to starting from data only. There is certainly a segment that goes data only, but they actually tend to want a lot of data. And it's a very specific niche segment. The low-cost data-only plan doesn't really resonate terribly well with the market.
So can you give us some information, even confidentially, on the take-up on those?
I think we filed that as a requirement from a previous decision, but we'd be happy to update it if you'd like.
That would be great. Thank you.
Madam, if I could go back to the connecting families concept and Rob's point, which is an important point, it's if something like that were to be crafted, it really needs to be an iterative dialogue, which is the point about it's tough to craft something like that in a formal hearing room. And the reason is you have questions about eligibility, continued eligibility, but more importantly, huge differences between broadband and wireless. In broadband, you provide a modem, we own the modem. In wireless, how does the low-income Canadian who would otherwise be eligible procure a handset, and which handset? In the Connecting Families program, the handset is the laptop. Government provided subsidies for that. We provide the modem because that's what we do as part of the service. The wireless model is different. So how do we decouple the hands? Because having a low-cost plan is kind of irrelevant if you don't have a handset. Handsets are very expensive, or do we provide a lower cost handset, and who's going to subsidize and finance that? Those are the kinds of, if we're going to go down that path as an industry, those are the things we have to do, and you can't do it kind of answering a question, giving an answer, and then we all go our respective ways and a decision comes out.
No, that's fair enough, and we did hear some concerns expressed by ExploreNet yesterday along the lines that, because they're targeting a rural market, that there may be issues there on the eligibility front and the burden that would put on them and their facilities. So I definitely appreciate that. I just want to talk as well about the win-back issue that was raised by Shaw yesterday in their proposal for a 90-day cooling-off period where you could not exercise win-back tactics.
So I'll ask Martin or Claire to talk a little bit about what role win-backs do and don't play in our competitive behavior in the market, but just a couple initial points. So first, I think as a threshold policy question, restricting the ability of competitors to make competitive offers to try to win customers or win back customers or offer consumers plans and prices that meet their needs is not something that you would ordinarily want to encourage as a regulator. I think it's pretty widely accepted from an economic perspective that you would only have a rule like that where it's absolutely required to allow a competitor to gain a foothold in a market, would be when you would ordinarily have seen these kinds of rules. And clearly, the regional entrants have much more than a foothold in the market if they're gaining a third of all net additions at this point. So it's sort of a rule that we're a bit surprised that now it's being suggested by Freedom because it's sort of anti-competitive on its face. But with that sort of policy premise, I'll ask Martin or Claire to comment on our use of them.
They are saying that they've experienced on the triggering of a number porting at that very instant when the customer is still in their store, but unfortunately they've already unwrapped the cellophane on the iPhone that the customer gets called. And
I was surprised to hear that comment yesterday as well, because when a number port request hits us, there is no manual intervention unless there's something wrong in the information provided, and the port goes through within a minute of receiving the port. We do not intervene in that port, and we don't call the customer. So I didn't recognize the example that Shaw illustrated.
I, too, was surprised when the team advised me that we were actually talking in a hearing about restricting wingbacks again, which is a 20-year-old movie that harmed competition back then and would harm it again.
So you would be in favor of continuing win-back promotions. Would you think that there should be any limits placed on the triggering of those win-back?
I think win-backs is a standard marketing practice in many industries, and I think that it affords Canadian consumers tremendous choice. So I wouldn't put any restrictions or guidelines on it. No, I think it's good for consumers.
We talked a little bit about rate increases, and I wanted to ask you about the pay-per-use prepaid rate increases, where I believe on Virgin Mobile's webpage, local minutes and long-distance rates will be doubling from 30 to 60 cents per minute, and the text messaging rates will be tripling from 20 to 60 cents per text in March of 2020. How do you see those rate increases impacting the needs of consumers that have occasional use or emergency-only plans?
I think in most instances, since those customers contracted with us, there's been a variety of changes in the market environment. And so there's a multitude of different offers for those individuals. So at the time many of those customers would have signed up, say it was more than 2 years ago, there was no Lucky Mobile. Rates were higher, as we spoke about earlier this morning. And so there is a variety of different offers for them available today. And there's, as I also stated earlier, there's no cancellation fee for those individuals. They're free to move and change plans as necessary to find something that suits their needs. So there's lots of offering. Prices on average are lower, and they have the choice and the freedom to move.
Okay, thank you. So I'm just going to change gears now and talk about the wholesale services in the MVNO market. As you know, the Competition Bureau considers that an MVNO market would occur naturally where you have either excess capacity at the wholesale level, differentiation between the MNO offerings, or willingness to negotiate MVNO agreements. And in the Competition Bureau's view, none of these conditions exist in Canada. Do you share that view?
So let's, to answer the question, let's just compare ourselves to the U.S. for a second. So take one of the examples that the Bureau gave, excess capacity. So in the U.S., you had a certain point in time, you have 4 carriers, go back years ago, two big players, 2 disruptors. One of the disruptors has kind of, through its uncarrier philosophy, managed to gain a lot of traction in the market. And then there's been a recent merger. But you had a couple of players, particularly one, Sprint, with, I think, excess capacity, and probably would have wanted to get into the wholesale market in order to load up its network. Don't have that in Canada. So that's one differentiation, point of differentiation. Another one is, looking at the customer segments that you'd want to address. The main carriers in the U.S. decided that they were going to tackle the premium end of the market, and the lower end of the market wasn't served, and that's how the MVNO market developed. They said, the carrier said, let's let somebody else tackle the bottom end of the market, so to speak, through MVNOs. In Canada, a different strategy. We all undertook a different strategy is to address each segment of the market with our own brands, which is why you have 10-plus brands in each geography. It's because we ourselves have addressed that market need. And then Another key point of differentiation between the two markets, so it just, I ask you to keep these in mind when you consider the Bureau's evidence. So another one is, in the U.S., as opposed to in Canada, the cable companies are now the wireless fourth entrants. Putting Rogers aside, they're a cable company who was one of the original three wireless carriers. But Eastlink, Videotron, and Shaw in particular, they're the new wireless carriers. They're a cable company. In the U.S., the cable companies didn't build their own network, so they're relying on MVNO access in order to gain access to that market. So there's differences between the market in the market. So bottom line is, each of the carriers is approaching the market through a retail strategy. Each of the carriers in Canada is attacking each segment of the customer base from low to high themselves, and those are big differences. And you're not going to see the cable carriers seek MVNO access because there are MNOs in their own right in wireless in Canada as opposed to the U.S.
Right. So if a would-be MVNO approaches Bell Mobility to negotiate access to the radio access network, what would be the starting point of that negotiation?
Well, we would consider whether or not there's a need for us to engage in those discussions from the point of view of, do we have excess capacity? Is there a portion of the market that we choose not to tackle on our own that the MVNO could? I mean, those are the kinds of things that we would be looking at. Martin, you want to?
Yeah, we take all approaches from MVNOs seriously, and we negotiate with them in good faith. We've had, I think, about 15 contacts in the last couple of years, hoping to discuss MVNOs. We have talked and met with every single one of them. Some of them we're continuing discussions with. As Mirko said, it focuses on what do we want to accomplish, and is it something that makes sense for both parties to engage in? That's typically the discussion, and then we get into, well, what does the business model end up looking like? So as I said, we've got several that we continue to have discussions with.
So you've had 15 contacts over how many years?
I think that's since 2015.
And how many agreements have you concluded in that time frame?
We haven't concluded any yet from those 15,
And
but
why
we do
would
have
that
5
be?
other wholesale agreements that are in place.
Why would that be that we're now 5 years later and none of those agreements have been concluded?
Well, to be honest, most of them are initial contacts from very small organizations that come and try to find out if this is something that makes sense. They come with a very light business plan and aren't yet prepared to continue those discussions. They haven't done the background work on it yet. So that's actually where the majority of the 15, I think we filed the details of them with you. So you'll be able to see kind of some of the names that have approached us, and a lot of them are not names that you would have heard of before.
And you have 5 agreements in place right now?
Yeah, well, they're wholesale type agreements, but reach kind of the same kind of conclusion.
Give my perspective. If the request is, want access to the best network in Canada for all customer segments in all geographies, and we'll offer all the same phones you do, et cetera, I'm a no, because we don't invest for nothing. We invest to differentiate our services from those of others. And if we invest, and what we're doing is allowing, either by regulatory mandate or just our own decision, to give everyone or some access to everything we offer as well, then we've lost our point of differentiation. And then there's the desire to continue to make those investments. Now, if it's a broad-based MVNO through regulatory mandate, then the desire to invest that incremental dollar is gone, but so arguably is the capacity to invest, given the financial impacts. So again, if the request, though, is a more targeted request to address a particular customer segment, and the business model makes sense, and we see that we can benefit from it as well, because there's a commercial negotiation, then yes, the team has the mandate to explore that. The first model, no mandate to explore.
So would it be fair to say that of those 15, none of them have met your factors, Mr. Bivig?
Yeah, so far, the discussions haven't reached an agreement yet.
So I'm getting the sense that there really haven't been much in the way of discussions. Is that fair?
No, I don't think that's true. We've, as I said, I think we filed with you the details of those discussions.
Okay.
So we absolutely take them seriously. We have the discussions. We try to get to a point of understanding what the business plan would look like and whether it's something that makes sense for both of us. But it does have to be a win-win. Right? It needs to be something that makes sense for both of us to do. It just has to work that way.
And do you have a set of terms and conditions that would be provided to a would-be MVNO at the time that they contact you? Or does that come later in the discussion?
Most of the discussion, I mean, each of these propositions is relatively unique, and so you try to explore what model works. And so standardized terms and conditions, I don't think really work in this space because each one of the opportunities is pretty different.
Okay. If the Commission were to mandate MVNO access on Bell's network, what would be your position about whether that should also be extended to TELUS and SaskTel, given your network sharing agreements?
I'll start, and then others will chime in. But I think before you ask yourself that question, we all have to ask ourselves, what's changed since 2015 when you last looked at this and decided not to mandate MVNOs? What's changed in the intervening period? Is the market more or less competitive? I think the answer is a resounding yes, the market is more competitive. Have prices come down? Again, the answer is yes. The price of data on our brands, for example, has come down between 37 and 80%. How are the new entrants been faring since 2015 when you last looked at this? Again, the evidence is clear that they're highly competitive. They're now accounting for a third of new additions. What have the new entrants been able to do in terms of extending their footprint, extending their coverage? The combined LTE footprint of Freedom and Videotron has gone from 45% to 75% of the population. The market, the wireless market, since 2015, when you last looked at this, has grown by 5 million subscribers. We're seeing that overage charges are quickly becoming a thing of the past. And the price per gig is projected to drop by somewhere around 50% by 2020. So if you look at all those factors between 15 and now, the question we ask ourselves is, where is the evidence to warrant such a sort of intrusive regulatory measure?
I think you've made clear your position that you don't think that the market is such that MVNO should be mandated, whether it be the model of the Competition Bureau or a different model. But I do want to give you the opportunity to comment with respect to some of the questions we have if we decide, based on the evidence on the record, that we do need to go in this direction, as to what that model would look like and how it would affect you. So my questions are directed at asking you some of the questions that we're also asking other interveners to comment on those.
Well, I won't say that you should mandate TELUS to give MVNO access or SaskTel. By the same token, I can't imagine that if there were an MVNO mandate that it would only be on Bell.
Okay. And there are parties that have filed comments on the record saying that there should be no marketing restrictions imposed by the host carrier on the MVNO. So what would your position be on that?
Every form of MVNO, these are highly aggressive regulatory prescriptions you're asking us about. I respect the fact that you need to explore them. They're highly aggressive. So any particular element that we're asked about that gives more latitude to an MVNO player that does not invest in their own networks and simply gets to ride the benefit of our $4 billion of capital each and every year in building the best networks will be met with no, you can't allow that. So if there are no restrictions at all on MVNO, that's the highest form of aggressive regulatory mandate you could possibly order. So we're completely opposed to it.
Okay. There's been some talk about the issue of network capacity to accommodate MVNOs. So I wanted to ask you whether you plan for spare capacity or whether you operate at 100% capacity on your networks.
Okay, we'll take that in two parts. I'll let Bruce jump in on kind of the guardrails he allows for the network to make sure we have a good experience. But again, kind of in terms of capacity and the impacts of an MVNO mandate would have on the capacity and therefore our need to invest. Again, back to a couple of hours ago, when met with extra capacity demands, we either invest more to meet that and maintain the same level of quality, or we hang back and we say we're not doing this and the quality dips. I gave the example of what happened with unlimited plans. The same thing has happened to us on mandated roaming. I'm talking about this incidental roaming. And there's the commission's rule where the smaller, the regional players get to roam on our network, but there's an ISED rule which allows Bell, Rogers, and TELUS to roam amongst each other. That also has had an impact on the demands on our network and our need to invest. And if you were to add MVNO onto that, it would put more of a strain on capacity on our network, and we'd have to make the decision as to whether or not we just meet that capacity demand or just let network quality suffer. And I'm sure you'll hear the same thing from the other MNOs. And then over to you, Bruce, on the specific question.
Yeah, well, network quality will degrade over time. Of course, the introduction of unlimited has put a lot of strain on a network. It's running hot now. We are anticipating, we plan for 50+% traffic growth year over year. That means a 10 times increase by 2025. So really, we are putting all new technology, 5G densification in play to keep ahead of the demand that we see based on the unlimited plans that are present in the marketplace.
Two Cows, one of the interveners in this proceeding, is of the view that the overall subscriber base in Canada is unlikely to increase as a result of MVNOs, so that a significant number of customers would be existing customers of carriers that it would compete for. Do you agree with that?
So if I understood your question, that their proposition is the market's not going to grow, there's just going to be a shift in subscribers from one provider to another?
Essentially, and that therefore the capacity would be enough to accommodate.
I think given the growth we've witnessed in wireless customers, and I referred to 5 million since 2015, that's an unlikely proposition that the market's not going to continue to grow, particularly, as we've said earlier, when you're seeing how far prices are coming down. So the entry into the wireless market is only becoming easier and more competitive. So I think you'll see that market continue to grow. So we don't agree.
So
you'd have to believe that there's no population growth in Canada. Right. You'd have to believe that there is no penetration growth in Canada, despite the fact that there's still kind of room as far as I can tell. And you'd have to believe, even if you believe those two things, and there's a static number of wireless subscribers in Canada, it's going to stay static. You also have to believe that all those wireless subscribers are going to be using the exact same amount of data in aggregate today, in 2, 3, 4, 5 years as they do today. None of those make sense.
So then increased MVNO access would lead to increased wireless adoption.
That's not what I said. Well, that's not what I meant to say. What I meant to say is there will be population growth in Canada, there will be penetration growth, and there will be usage growth regardless of whether or not we have mandated MVNOs.
Okay.
If it helps, we did in Margaret's first report, there's some evidence on the impact of MVNO regulation on wireless penetration. And I think what's clear if you look around the world is that mandating MVNO access hasn't increased wireless penetration. And just on the Two Cows point, if their point is that mandating MVNOs won't affect usage and won't bring any new subscribers into the market, then I think the obvious question is what benefit would there be to mandating MVNOs?
And I believe your position is that with respect to essentiality, it doesn't meet the test.
That's correct. There are three elements to the test, as you know. Is competition sustainable? Clearly, competition in the market today is sustainable, as evidenced by the success the new entrants are having and as evidenced by the number of their subscribers they're adding. So clearly, we have a sustainable competitive environment. Looking forward, there certainly doesn't seem to be any indication of undue market power, given, as Mark said earlier, we're not in a position to act independently of our competitors in terms of pricing. We have to act in response to the competitive changes in the market, and you've seen how Freedom has influenced that, and you've seen how the unlimited plans have influenced that. So clearly, an MVNO access mandate is not an essential facility. People have been able to acquire spectrum and build networks outside of that mandate.
And just to confirm, you would agree that at the wholesale level, the geographic market would be national?
No, I think our position, and it's in our May filing, and I think throughout our filings, is that the relevant geographic market is, as we talked about earlier, either a CMA or, to your point about covering any of the
No, I'm talking about the wholesale.
I think it's the same geographic market.
Okay, sorry. Okay. And just refresh me on why you would say that at the wholesale level.
I think if you're looking at whether to mandate a wholesale service, the question is, does it meet the essentiality test in a relevant market? Because the essentiality test is driven off the definition of a relevant market. And so if the relevant market is, for all the reasons we've given, that more local market, then that's the appropriate wholesale market as well.
Do you think that in areas where regional carriers have built out their RAN, that this would decrease the likelihood of further duplication by new facilities-based competitors in that region?
I was going to ask, sorry, when you said that this would decrease the likelihood, just refresh us on what this is.
Right. Well, so we have some regional competitors that have built out or duplicated RAN under the test. Do you think that there could still be more duplication, or that this would decrease the likelihood of further duplication given, saturation in the market?
If the question is, do we think it's likely that a fifth carrier will build out the same areas that the fourth carriers have already built out? I think Mirko said it could happen on a regional basis. I think if you look around the world, Canada is doing quite well with 4 carriers in every market, so I wouldn't expect sort of widespread duplication to 5 and 6 facilities-based carriers. I think for a country of our size, we're doing quite well.
I'm a bit confused, but if the question is, would an MVNO mandate, so duplication of networks is a good thing. It means
Yes.
You have competition at the network layer. So you'd want the regional carriers who are here today to continue to expand their networks, and I think it's in their desire and to do so. So that's what you'd want. So duplication is a good thing in that sense. So as I hear the question, I'm saying, well,
Do you think it's likely?
I think it's likely that the existing regional operators wish to expand their operations. I also think it's likely that with mandated MVNO, they will do the opposite.
Okay.
And I think you heard some of that yesterday. In fact, the Bureau has said that as well.
But if we look at the Bureau's model, I believe you suggested that by the time the new rules could be implemented, regional carriers are likely to have already hit a 5.5% threshold in many additional CMAs, and that it wouldn't have much impact on the penetration of regional carriers.
Okay, well, there's a difference between expanding their networks and then gaining more share.
Yeah, if I understand your question, our evidence is that
They're going to get there
this idea that
already.
they're not going to get there and need to be accelerated through regulatory intervention is not warranted by the evidence if you look
So don't
at
give them
current
the head
trends.
start.
Well, it's not, don't give them the head start. Keep in mind that they're about to acquire spectrum in an auction on preferred terms, so that they will access more spectrum for 5G. So our view is that the evidence just doesn't warrant the type of intervention that you're contemplating. They'll get there. I think we all, and even if they don't get there as fast as you would like, it's clear that the competitive benefits, and by those I mean the price competition that we're seeing in the market, are already happening. And I gave the example earlier of, while Freedom may have a 4% market share in Ontario, I'm just picking that as an example, it's clear that Freedom's presence in Ontario is benefiting Ontario wireless customers by way of price reductions, and we're seeing that, and the evidence shows that. So bottom line is, we don't think the regulatory intervention you're contemplating is justified by the evidence and the trends going forward.
Okay. If we look at the Bureau's proposal, what do you see as administrative or operational challenges to implementing it?
Again, you know our position on the Bureau's proposal.
So you don't want to comment?
Well, the one comment I would make is the idea of a sunset clause. Important to have a sunset clause. We're skeptical that if you do mandate access under that model, that the sunset will ever happen. I think history has shown on the wireline side of the equation that once something is mandated, it tends not to go away, and it tends to be expanded as others seek the benefit of it. And again, we think that's the wrong approach in the wireless market.
And I'm not going to answer so much on complexity, but why we firmly believe that all models are very risky in terms of the balance between the potential impacts on investment and then what would otherwise you would try to achieve with any model. But let's talk about the Bureau model even, because some people believe that it's the least aggressive form of intervention. So if that were the model, and I have already said I think it's likely the least aggressive of very aggressive forms of intervention, right. Even I would sit there in our boardrooms and I'd say, okay, now we're faced with this. It still will impact how much we invest. I guarantee you it will. And one of the reasons is we'll say, okay, what happens in 5 years when the regional operator who's benefited from this Bureau model hasn't met all those conditions? What will really happen? We know what happened in 1997 when loops were mandated in the traditional telephony world. They were supposed to be sunsetted in 2002, and they were finally forborne in 2019. I'll have that in my mind. Mm-hmm. And then I'll think, okay, what really happens when you've got a base of customers that one of the regional operators has in one of the markets that they were supposed to gradually build into in 5 years, and if they haven't done it, what do we do with those customers? Do I get to say, click, you're out? That's what I will be thinking about. And I will make my judgment that even with this model, there is a big risk. And then I'll say, and then at the same time, it's going to impact our market share, clearly, impact our revenues, and then we're back to my first answer to you, Vice Chairperson, sorry, which is got to cut investment.
So in terms of limiting the impacts, the negative impacts on investment, there were some interveners that have talked about potential eligibility criteria, such as, you have to build out your own facilities, not surpassing a certain level of subscribership, only serving certain geographic areas. owning spectrum, are there any conditions that you think would reduce the negative impact that you say it would have on your investments? That,
No.
okay. And I imagine you would not be in favor of any resale by an MVNO of their access.
No, we would not be in favor of that.
And another limitation that some parties proposed was to exclude access to host carriers' domestic or international roaming agreements. Would that be possible?
We take that as an undertaking. I'm not sure we have an answer for you.
Okay. What's your position on whether 5G networks are included in the roaming tariffs?
Our view is the roaming tariffs were designed for a different iteration of network technology. So the tariff was designed for a previous generation network, so not included in 5G is the short answer.
And so if the Commission were to mandate some kind of MVNO access, would you contemplate that the 5G network would be part of that access?
No, should not be part of that access. Should be no access, but that would include not to 5G.
And why is that?
Well, it's the same principle and approach as to why we believe there should not be
It's the investment.
access whatsoever. But we are on the cusp as an industry to taking that next big step in building the communications backbone for the country. It really is the communications backbone for the country. And so these decisions are going to have an impact on two things: continued fiber deployment and 5G deployment. Those are two fundamental things for the next generation of, the Canadian economy. And so that would be one reason to answer no to your question, which is we should not be taking risks with the pace and extent of 5G deployment in Canada.
If mandated, and I recognize your discomfort given your position on the whole issue of mandating MVNOs, but I do want to get your views on the record about whether, if mandated, there should be commercial negotiation or commission set terms and conditions, baseline conditions, wholesale tariffs as a backstop. Can you elaborate on that?
So in a world where MVNOs are mandated, our view would be that rates should be set through a commercial negotiation. If the commercial negotiation is unsuccessful, it could be backstopped through any one of a number of forms of arbitration.
And the arbitration would be by a third party or through the Commission's process?
I think you could do it either way. I heard the discussion the other day about your ability to delegate your statutory authority in terms of rate setting, but I think either the Commission could do it with the assistance of experts if they decided that they needed that, or the Commission could do it itself. And you have the FOA model on the broadcasting side that, is a good precedent when commercial negotiations fail.
Some parties talked about non-binding mediation. Would you see that as part of the escalation of the negotiation process to the level of arbitration, or just negotiations break down and you go to arbitration?
I think if you followed the existing route you follow on the broadcasting side, there's a period of negotiation, there is non-binding mediation, and then ultimately goes to arbitration. If that's the final resort, that seems to make sense.
And what are your views on the retail minus approach that some parties mentioned as a way of setting rates?
So we don't think any cost-based or costing mechanism is the right way to set rates in a world of mandated access. It should be negotiated. I think retail minus in particular, as I understand it, can have the unintended consequence of perhaps increasing the retail price because the model is set up so that the wholesale rate is a discount off of the retail rate.
Do you care to comment on Competition's Bureau model in terms of investment targets for an MVNO and building out over a 5-year period?
No.
Okay. Do you have any views on what repercussions might be if investment targets were not met?
No.
Just give me a minute here. I just want to talk to you a little bit about the issue of eSIMs. So the Canadian Electrical Association and some other parties have raised eSIMs as something that they would like the Commission to look at in this proceeding. Do you support the use of eSIMs on your network?
I think I'll let Bruce answer that, but the answer is yes, essentially.
Yeah, we support eSIMs, and we have platforms that download eSIM profiles in real time.
And do you permit devices with more than one network profile to access your network?
Currently, I believe we're capable of doing that.
I'm sorry?
I believe that we can, yes.
You do that now? It's capable, or you do it?
It's possible to.
Okay. Have you had some negotiations with some of these parties that are looking to have that capability? You know, electrical utilities, railways, cities?
Yes, we have it, and we've described some of that in our responses to the Commission's RFIs on this point. But I think, in short, we've had some discussions. I'm not sure they've really progressed generally to the level of negotiation, and that's largely because on the customer side, there's not necessarily alignment between individual customers and some of the associations. So, we describe in our RFI response a meeting with the CEA where there was some divergence in views among the membership around exactly what kind of model they wanted, and so that conversation is ongoing. On the Halton Regional Police have one model in mind, but that model is still in a testing phase through Public Safety Canada that hasn't settled a final model. And I think the vast majority of other public safety organizations have a different approach in mind to the one that Halton Regional Police have. And so it's really early days, I think, is the bottom line for all of these types of conversations. We've got a number of solutions in the market that have been very successful with customers and with these types of needs, critical infrastructure and public safety, that's really serving their needs, some of which we're quite proud of that are innovative solutions. So those are continuing to sort of find take-up, and the conversations are continuing around other models.
So is it fair to say that that's an area where you think it would be premature for the Commission to intervene and that the negotiations should just take place as they are right now?
Yeah, absolutely. We think it's quite a complex area with a range of paths to go down, and that needs to be settled commercially between the relevant parties.
Okay. In terms of network sharing agreements, your view is that they should be allowed to continue and they provide benefits. What do you say to the parties that have seen these as anti-competitive and would like them to be prohibited?
Well, I listened closely to the Bureau's evidence yesterday, and they commented on network sharing agreements, and the comment they made, and they're the competition regulator, was, they can have commercial benefits, they increase speed of deployment of networks and are therefore pro-competitive. And to the extent that there's an issue with a particular agreement, I think the representative from the Bureau said the devil is in the details. We're quite happy to talk about, Martin will talk about how our network sharing agreement with TELUS bears absolutely no relation to how we compete with TELUS at the retail level. The agreement, is quite specific about that. And maybe, Martin, you can take us through it.
Yeah, our network sharing agreements have actually led to a heightening of competition. So when we first contemplated network reciprocity with TELUS, each of the two carriers were contemplating building an HSPA network. We would have built two HSPA networks in all the same places, and a lot of coverage areas would have been left uncovered. By combining the build, we've expanded coverage to places that in the past never had multiple carriers competing. So the efficiency allowed us to build a vast network in northwestern Ontario where there was only a single carrier before our network arrived there, and brought two more carriers into the market. Similarly, the network sharing agreement in Saskatchewan increased the number of competitors in that market from 2 to 4. We've built coverage in places that otherwise would never have seen coverage, and the people in those places absolutely benefit from that. So we view network reciprocity as a very competitive a tool to increase competition.
And some parties have suggested that these network sharing agreements ought to be filed with the Commission for approval. What are your thoughts on that?
We disagree vehemently.
Yeah, so...
No, those are my thoughts. They should not be filed.
Okay, because?
Because they're market-based. They allow us to move rapidly. They allow us to go to market rapidly. They increase efficiency. And what would the Commission be doing with the agreement? And is it just a step towards pre-approval? And then I don't see why that would be necessary. So, it's working.
Okay. What about your thoughts on a joint build of 5G networks, which has been mandated in some other countries? Do you disagree with that? I guess coordinated joint planning for 5G networks.
So I think, and others will surely want to jump in, but we certainly disagree with a mandated joint build for 5G. As you saw right from the very first frame in our video and on through our presentation, we're eager to invest in the best networks to deliver the best value services to Canadians. And our motivation to do that is to be the best in the market, and that's what motivates us to do that. So a joint build mandate to us just sounds like a recipe to slow down 5G deployment in Canada. In terms of some of the joint coordination, I think it has the same impact. So if I were someone worried about falling behind in the 5G build-out race, I would try to impose some kind of process solution in the middle that slows down my competitors from building out 5G, and forcing them to spend their time in a working group with me describing their plans to me would be a good way to do that. So we certainly think there's opportunities for carriers to work together where it makes commercial sense to make municipal approvals go more quickly, but a mandate that forces carriers to all move in lockstep, we don't support.
So what aspects of the Shaw proposal for a working group are you in agreement with, and where would you differ?
I think our core difference is our experience with those types of working groups is that they haven't sped up deployment. You have conversations over a long period of time, and things don't get resolved, and then they end up being resolved outside the working group the way they would have anyways. So like I said, we're not opposed to, and we have in the past where it's made sense in coordinating municipal projects in order to improve efficiency for the municipality and for ourselves. But I think our core disagreement with it is just that it's not necessary.
Okay. Do you have concerns with respect to disclosure of competitively sensitive information? Were there to be some joint work?
Yeah. Yes, my former life is as a competition lawyer, so if someone asked me in the company about participating in this kind of working group, I'd quickly say, you need to have a lawyer there, and here are your guidelines, and one would be, don't disclose any information about your plans.
And what about non-disclosure agreements as a way of mitigating any concerns on that front?
Well, I think typically the concern is about disclosing competitively sensitive information to your competitors rather than them disclosing it to someone
Right.
else, so I don't think it really solves the issue.
It doesn't apply. I just want to talk a little bit more about some of the concerns that have been expressed about access to support structures. Can you talk to me about the average time it takes you to grant access to a support structure?
So I think our support structure tariffs have timelines. It varies. The appropriate timeline varies based on the nature of the request. So the more support structures you're requesting access to, obviously, the bigger the lift in terms of investigating each. And so the timelines are a little bit longer. And similarly, I think there's a longer timeline for support structures that are located in remote regions because the investigation can be more difficult. So I don't know. I don't have an overall average amongst all those categories, but there are timelines in the tariff.
So what do they range from?
I don't, out on the top of my head, I don't want to venture a guess. I'd have to go back and check.
Okay.
But if it helps, Vice Chair Leisner, when we looked back to 2014 to look at how many instances of permit denials to our support structures we'd had, and it showed that 1% of the permit requests we received in Ontario and Quebec were actually denied. So I think that is good evidence that that we act responsibly and only deny permit requests when there's a legitimate foreseeable use for us or some other reason. And sometimes these poles are also owned by the utility but administered by us, right. So it's not simple either.
Do you provide reasons for denials, or do you just deny?
I'd have to dig back and find out what level of detail we provide, and we'll undertake to do that.
Is that is there a concern there about releasing confidential information if you give a reason, or you just don't know?
I don't have the factual answer for you right now, so
all right.
Happy to look at it and file something.
Okay. Do you suggest alternatives if you're going to deny access to a support structure?
Do we suggest alternatives to the permit seeker?
Yes.
If there was an available alternative and it wasn't something that was within our plan, we would, I'm sure, suggest options.
And what about the time it takes to get access to towers, for example? Oh,
Yeah, we have a process for that. It's very well understood, the ISID process. I don't think anyone is really complaining about that. It's a complex thing. There's structures involved. Engineers have to do structural analysis, but it seems to be working, and we haven't had any complaints.
What's your experience in terms of getting access to municipal infrastructure?
It obviously varies widely from project to project and municipality to municipality, but we have encountered cases of up to 2 years in negotiations with a municipality about accessing infrastructure required to deploy networks, and that's really the reason, or the core reason, why we've proposed here and elsewhere that a preferable model to the consent model that we have today would be one based on notification. So there'd be a prescribed notification that you network builder would give to a municipality, and they'd have an opportunity to object to the proposed work if they thought it interfered with the appropriate public use of the land, but otherwise the project could proceed. And we think that would really speed up the timing. And it's a model that was proposed as a trial in the UK in 2012 with a 5-year sunset. And at the end of the 5 years, the government actually chose not to sunset the legislation. So it took a step to extend the legislation because it had really expanded the pace of broadband build-out.
But is there an average time that you find it in your planning, you plan in an average amount of time to get access to municipal infrastructure, leaving aside, a situation such as you've mentioned where it could take up to 2 years?
I don't know if Bruce has a comment, but I don't think across the various projects that we're building that we have a sense of what an average timeline would be. And I think, like I said, it varies also by municipality. So even if you isolated a type of project, the timeline could be very different between cities.
And what are your views on the thoughts of some of the parties that, they should get access on a first come, first served basis to support structures and...
So we don't support that view for a number of reasons. One is, there does need to be someone coordinating the access. So everything from issues around if it's wireless attachments, issues around interference and safety code 6 and the placement of the device, or integrity of the structure issues. The other thing on support structures is the way that the Commission's process is designed contemplates that the support structure owner is never forced to build new support structures or to build them more quickly as a result of third-party use, and that's the whole basis for the Commission's tariff and mandate. And so a first-come, first-serve approach is just fundamentally inconsistent with that mandate. And then it has major impacts on the ability to plan a network build methodically. You can imagine the timelines and the complexity involved in rolling out fiber across an entire city, which is something we do as part of our business. And if in the middle of that someone could insert themselves onto one of our support structures, once the network had already been designed and potentially force a redesign of the network, it's going to increase the cost and slow down the pace of build out.
Some parties have suggested that you should track and document spare capacity to support structures. And I believe your position is that you don't do that right now. You don't have a future projects database, and that it would be expensive. And I'm just wondering if you could expand on the expense involved.
Yeah, so the suggestion being that we would somehow create a database for all of our support structures. I think the key points to understand are the requests for access to support structures touch a very, very small number of the support structures in our network. So they may vary, they happen in every given region, but they apply to only a very small number of the support structures. So you'd be creating a database for the whole universe to deal with a very small number.
Could you deal with that small number, or are they the usual kind of spots geographically?
No, I don't. We're not aware of any way that we could fulfill the purpose that the people requesting this are hoping to fulfill by just picking a few support structures. And then we'd be into a debate over whether we picked the right support structures and how do we know. And like I said, the requests do touch in every region. It's just that they don't touch every single support structure within the region. And then just to make it really clear, so that's one issue. The other issue is then the denials, as Rob said, are 1% of all the requests. So you have this big universe. You've got a very narrow universe that are the requests. You have 1% of that very narrow universe that are the denials. The denials for future use are a smaller percentage of that. And then the future use is ours, and it's third parties who've put in a permit application first. And then the impacts on availability from other municipal works and other construction projects change from day to day as project designs change, customer demands change. So there'd be this tens of millions of dollars effort to create this huge database for a narrow universe of issues, and then
Is that
an
just a
ongoing upkeep.
guesstimate, the tens of millions of dollars, or have you, actually kind of quantified it, looking at it?
It's
just
like by the people who
big
would do it, an
thinking?
educated estimate.
Okay. Okay. Just a bit of cleanup here on my questions. I'm wondering if you can undertake to provide a concrete cost estimate in terms of the costs of implementing seamless roaming with regional roaming customers, both the initial cost and then the annual cost to maintain it.
Yes, we can provide that. I would note, just on the point of seamless roaming, and we didn't touch on it when you were questioning us on it, but this was requested by the new entrants in 2015, as you'll recall.
Right.
At
it
that
was not
point
mandated,
in time,
right.
it wasn't mandated. And the reason it wasn't
Right.
mandated is because they didn't provide evidence that convinced you that there was a need to mandate it. And similarly, until yesterday, when you invited Shaw, I guess, to submit evidence, there, to my knowledge, hadn't been any evidence on the record justifying that type of mandate. So I just wanted to clarify that point. I presume that when Shaw submits its evidence, we'll have an opportunity to respond to it, because it is an important issue.
And if it were required, in your view, would there have to be a revision to the mandated roaming rate?
I think the answer is yes.
And so could you undertake to provide your view on what a revised rate would be?
Yes, we could.
Great, thank you. And the last question is, do you have data supporting your position on international price comparisons for spectrum?
Which aspect, the spectrum license fees?
The cost of spectrum.
Yes, we'll put that.
And you can undertake to file that?
Yes.
Great. Those are all my questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have just a couple of small questions. I was interested as you described the many advantages associated with the joint network build. Accelerated deployment, lower cost for everyone. That was with one player, and I appreciate Mr. Bivek's earlier explanation that a party needs to bring to the table, something upon which you can make a deal. But presumably, if you take Rogers, for example, also a national player with network assets, that logic would prevail too. So if sharing with one other player doesn't have an impact on competition but allows for efficient network build, wouldn't it be even better if it were with three? And I guess I can extend the question to say, does that have any bearing on the rollout of 5G nationally?
I'm sorry.
So there are other examples of network sharing that Rogers participated in Quebec with Videotron that I think Claire talked to earlier, certainly accelerated Videotron's network deployment in that province. And they did likewise with MTS in Manitoba, which also advanced their network in Manitoba. I don't know if that quite answers the question, but.
I mean, an element of it is where we started from back in 2008 when we were moving to HSPA in order to catch up to the other player with a different technology. And now we're in a position where, and that did allow us to, time to market event, time did allow us to catch up, allowed us to expand faster than we otherwise would have expanded. So you have to kind of appreciate the history of where we came from. Now you have, when you're thinking about the existing reciprocity agreement we have with the one player, and you're asking, would it make sense to extend it to a third, and then you ask, okay, well, what assets are brought to the table? In that case, we do cover more of the country than they do. We have complete overlap. And so in that case, the dynamic isn't the same as it was in 2008.
Fair enough, I understand, but what about for 5G? Is there any logic to that approach as you're all beginning to build out 5G?
Again, it's the element of differentiating amongst each other. We do differentiate our services at retail from TELUS, despite the network reciprocity agreement. That is completely differentiated.
That's
as well.
understood.
Yeah.
Maybe my last question for you, Mr. Bibick. You made a comment early on in your responses to Commissioner Leisner about the undeniably good for consumers, I believe was the term you used, as the impact of the introduction of unlimited plans. When were they, generally speaking, when did they come into the market in the U.S.?
Yeah, I think in terms of unlimited plans in the U.S., we saw them many years ago. I'd have to go back to get a specific date, but it was more than 5 years ago.
And I guess the obvious question that comes to my mind is, given they're undeniably good for consumers, they have, you've had fast take-up. It's resulting in network expansion, increased data use, a whole bunch of goodies. Mm-hmm. Why did it take us so long to introduce them? What was the restraining factor then?
Well, my answer when I said those exact words, there was a big, long second part to that answer, which is we have to contend with the growth in usage and the capacity investments required to keep up with that demand. So there is always, the other side of it as well. And I would answer, I mean this in the right way, but we are where we are. We are where we are. Like whether or not the U.S. did it 5 years ago or 8 years ago, we didn't have regional competitors, and now we do. And 4 years ago, we had a competitive market, and now it's more competitive. We are where we are, and where we are today is we have unlimited plans. We have device financing. We have introduced Lucky Mobile since in December 2017. We have low-cost data plans. Why did we do that one? Because the Commission asked us to. There's a whole bunch of reasons. Some are market-based, some are regulatory, some impediments were cost. There's a whole bunch of reasons, but we are where we are, and it's a competitive market, and that competitive market is also, writ large, undeniably good for consumers.
Thank you. Members, do any other members have questions? Joanne, Commissioner Levy?
Thank you. I just have a couple of questions that go to your comments about the importance of differentiating yourself in the market. Throughout this proceeding, we've heard a lot about the fact that the big three are the big three. What do you look at as the top one or two differentiating factors between Bell and versus TELUS Rogers?
I think I'll jump in on that one. First and foremost, the primary differentiator that we work for each and every single day at Bell is our network. To provide the absolute best network quality that we can to Canadians. And I think regular studies show that Canadians actually in general experience much better network quality than the vast majority of the world. And so that is our primary focus and differentiator for the Bell brand. The best networks, whether that's 5G, 4G LTE advanced. And then, of course, there's a variety of other reasons, but if you look at consumer surveys over and over again, what is critical and important to them is that is the primary thing that people hold of importance.
I would just put a punctuation mark on the answer by summarize quality of network, speed, coverage, and of course brand is an advantage. And mandated MVNO would mandate commonality on speed and coverage, because the MVNO players would get access to our speed, differentiation, and our coverage.
And the other question I had went to your comments very early on about profitability, and then later on in the discussion with my colleague, there was some admission that the Canadian market isn't static. There will be population growth. There will be take-up of new devices and new opportunities to use data and so forth as time goes on. So isn't there enough potential room for expansion in the system to allow both some new entrants, perhaps in the way of entrants who might come in an MVNO situation, as well as protecting some of the parameters that you feel are important to preserve your investment and your profitability?
You know, there's a constituency who will say, and they've said for years and years, look at the profits that Bell generates in the absolute. Looks like a big number on the page, but I'll give you an example. If it's $10 of profit, of course in the real world you can add a few zeros to that, but if it's $10 of profit and we invest $5, there's $5 left over for the shareholder. I mean, this is simplistic, but just to highlight it. If as a result of a regulatory outcome, the profit goes to 9, it's easy to say, keep your 5 of investment and there's 4 to shareholders. No. It can't even be 5 to shareholders tomorrow. It's got to be 6 to shareholders tomorrow, because we have to grow the free cash flow to support the dividend growth. So if the profit goes to 9, the investment's got to be cut in order to keep, free cash flow stable and grow. And just so, a little story, if I may. During the transition last fall to me taking over officially as CEO on January 6th, I went and met with the largest shareholders of BCE, Toronto, New York, London, Frankfurt. And there was a consistent theme throughout those meetings, but one struck me in particular, and it was in Frankfurt. So this is a shareholder that held last fall $800 million of BC shares, so it's a big shareholder. I probably hadn't even sat down before, after shaking hands around the table, and the lead investor said, tell me why I should be investing in your country. And tell me more. I knew where it was going. And it was the regulatory risk that the investor base perceives. We had skipped a step. It wasn't even, tell me why I should invest in Bell anymore. It was, why should we invest in your country, given this? So why should we invest in Bell? Why should we invest in your industry? Why should we even invest in your country? That's kind of scary. And that's why I've said over and over again in the 3.5 hours we've had together that these decisions inevitably affect investment. Like, I know what I have to do. There's a lot of constituencies we have to serve, customer being the first, our communities. We take all this seriously. But ultimately, I've talked about shareholder a lot, and I know it comes across as, here come the corporate suits, talk about shareholder all the time. That's not what we think about all the time. But one of the things we have to deliver on is growing that free cash flow to deliver the dividend and to grow the dividend. And we will do it every single time. And we're going to have to make some hard decisions at the end of the day to deliver on that. Investment's going to have to be cut. We'll serve our customers, in other ways, and we'll always make sure the community is at the forefront. But that's why it's really real. And when you sit in the chair and you have somebody say that to you, you go, oh, okay, this is serious.
So you don't feel that there's enough room for expansion in the country?
No, it's Look, we'll manage, but one of the ways we would manage is if there's a mandated MVNO, I'm not saying $4 billion goes to zero, but $4 billion goes to something significantly less. And that significantly less means something. So if Margaret's study says $500 million industry-wide, $500 million less invested industry-wide each and every year, just to put a perspective on it, that's 250,000 fewer homes connected to fiber countrywide. I'm not just talking about Bell, 250,000. That's Gatineau, Belleville, Kingston, and add a couple of communities each and every year. It just means that things are slower or things don't get done.
Thank you.
Commissioner Barron.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask you the MVNO question in a slightly different way. We heard you talk about the significant investments that Bell makes, and we also heard you say, Mr. Bibic, that duplication in infrastructure is a good thing. But the reality is that Bell benefits from a network reciprocity sharing agreement. And you can argue that the network sharing gives Bell and TELUS a very big advantage over regional players that would technically have to build out their entire infrastructures. So Bell did not have to build out its wireless network nationally. And in this respect, the network sharing agreement gives Bell a competitive advantage over regional players. Now, if we wanted to create a more competitive playing field, so let's take it from that perspective, and allow regional players to benefit from the similar kinds of competitive advantage that Bell benefited from, and specifically to not have them build out 100% of their networks, and understanding that there's not an ability for everyone to have a network sharing agreement because there are not enough of those to go around. So from the perspective of having a more equitable, competitive playing field between incumbents like Bell and the newer regional players, I'd like to hear what you have to say about a potential MVNO access policy that gives facilities-based regional players MVNO access to a percentage of their built-out coverage, so that they too can benefit from the kinds of advantages that Bell has benefited from.
Well, I disagree with the comment that there's not enough to go around. I don't know what it means, but I can create some theoretical examples. Eastlink, Shaw, and Videotron could have a network sharing agreement. Rogers could have a network sharing agreement with any one of them. In fact, they have had network sharing agreements and still do with a couple of them. So things can be in the marketplace. You can arrive at those solutions. On the perceived advantages, those advantages come through investments in network, and ultimately that's what drives competition, and that's what we submit the Commission ought to support. So, the regional operators have done a pretty good job to date, and they're going to continue to do a good job, I'm sure. And they've done that by continuing to invest and catching up. Claire gave examples. LTE went to LTE Advanced, no iPhone went to iPhone. Those are Shaw's continuing to expand its networks because they want to catch up and pass us. And then when they get close, we want to make sure we invest more and differentiate ourselves. That's what we ought to want to support. Now, they don't cover the entirety of the country like we do, and part of it is choice. They likely don't want to. It's not in their long-range plans, while at the same time, I'm sure they want to expand their coverage, and they're doing it. But in the meantime, their customers are not harmed, because Freedom has a customer base in Toronto and a customer base in Calgary, and when that Calgary customer is traveling to Montreal, they get to roam on our network. And it's mandated by the Commission, and they get a mandated rate. So there's no disadvantage there. And they get the advantage of the best network if they roam on us. So there already been regulatory prescriptions put in place to assist the regional operators get better faster, and those are just some examples.
If I might just add two points that I think might help on this. So one is, we're talking about the network sharing agreements like it's sort of simply a matter of stitching together two providers, and we made the point earlier that you need reciprocity, but it's more than just you need a reciprocity of contributions, but the contributions need to be made voluntarily to align everyone's incentives in such a complex agreement. Because if you can't have it kind of both ways. You can't say, you need a reciprocity of assets, but you're forced to be in the agreement no matter what, because then each party's incentive is to not contribute as much and just free ride the other party's contributions. So it's really crucial to the functioning of such a complex agreement that they be voluntarily entered into, and you can exit them and you can build outside them and not share the benefits if you don't feel the counterparty is doing the same. And the other thing, Mirko mentioned the domestic roaming that we have, but we've talked about it a couple times, but I think it's important to underline the impact that even that has on investment. So even incidental usage of our network by a facilities-based carrier has reduced investment in really concrete ways that I think Martin can talk about.
Yeah, the mandated domestic roaming, certainly after the tariff rates were announced, caused us to reevaluate some investments we were making in coverage. If you think about expanding coverage, you can do it for two reasons. You can add coverage in a town and therefore be able to compete for the subscribers in that town, or highway coverage to get to places that people want to get to from places where you already have a network. So for us, it's a real advantage when we have better coverage in rural areas or vacation areas where people from larger cities tend to go. And we can market that advantage that you can stay connected all the way to your cottage in the Gatineaus. But with mandated roaming, we had to share that advantage. And so it no longer was a reason to build, because along those highways, there aren't people living there. And so you're not going to win subscribers there. And at the end of the day, if that coverage is extended to every other carrier, you don't have an advantage, so why build it? And so there were key areas that we had to reevaluate, marginal coverage areas like that we had to reevaluate building out. And a few years ago, we had to make the tough call to reduce some of the investment we made in Northern Ontario and parts of Northern Quebec, because they weren't going to give us the payback on those investments, whereas previously we would have believed that we would have won the subscribers that traveled that route a lot, and that would have given us a leg up versus others. So those mandated things, they do in fact impact those investment decisions we make on a day-to-day basis, because the business case evaporates.
So I understand that if the payback is not there, there are decisions that you would have made potentially to not expand the network, and that you did because you had access to a network sharing agreement. So you are benefiting from a network that has this wider coverage. And I guess if I heard you correctly, this type of network sharing agreement would be open and is still an option for regional players. And my concern is in the event that this is not the case, for the Commission to be able to find an alternative way to offer regional players the same benefits that you have through your sharing agreement. If it's not through sharing, it's through an MVNO type policy.
Well, so the coverage is already available to all the carriers through mandated roaming. So I think that as we kind of said, that ship has sailed, but that is available to everybody as it is. The coverage is there. You don't need to have network sharing in order to provide access to a nationwide footprint.
Those aren't choices. The real choices are they can continue to expand their networks through building, which they've done a very good job of doing since 2008, and they can have their own discussions to align if it suits their mutual interests. There are multiple players there who are not in network sharing or network reciprocity agreements who could align. Not sure why the inevitable answer is we must mandate access to the TELUS Bell network reciprocity agreement, because if that's done, then it's, as Mark says, it's no longer a network reciprocity agreement. It's just the government, the CRTC deciding everyone's going to be on one network. Then you've lost competition at the network level, which is what we ought to encourage.
Okay, thank you. I have one more question. the Quebec market was brought up several times as an example of a strong, of a market where there is a strong regional competitor. And I believe, Ms. Gillies, you made the point that Videotron made Bell better. And it was in reference to, I believe, the competitive dynamic that resulted in lower prices for consumers and efficiencies for Bell. So can I take it then that you support incenting strong regional competitors in all regions of Canada that do not have one as one of the Commission's policy objectives?
The reason Claire indicated that regional competitors have made Bell better, in fact, I would say they've made the entire industry better, is because they've built their own networks and they've made those networks better. And then we've continued to invest in order to stay ahead, keep pace, et cetera, and vice versa. That's why. And I know, again, there's the other side of the debate that says, do not believe the incumbents. They will always continue to invest. I hear that all the time. It's not the case. So if the incentives are gone, there will be less investment and there will be slower pace of deployment, and that's going to have a big impact on competition and the values consumers get from our communication systems and the values that enterprises get as well. So that's really the assessment that needs to be made. We can say we'll nudge the regional competitors along faster. That's going to have an impact. Through mandated MVNOs, that's going to have an impact. And then you got to weigh the other side of the equation. How harmful will be that impact? And we're squarely on this side of the debate. And to those who say we will continue to invest at the same time because we must do 5G and all these things, I think I gave my answer to Commissioner Levy. We will make our trade-offs. I assure you we will make our trade-offs.
Thank you.
Commissioner McDonald.
Good afternoon now. Just one question. Those providers that have flanker brands point to those brands as offering added competition in the market. But I want to jump back to your exchange very early on with Vice Chair Leisner around affordability. And we have studies that show a large cross-section of Canadians that are price sensitive, that are out there looking for a lower cost plan, aren't overly interested in moving to a flanker brand because there's a perception that the flanker brands are lower in quality. Bell positions itself as a premium brand using taglines like best network, Canada's fastest network, most reliable network, and I understand why you do that. I also fully understand why you wouldn't want a Bell rep suggesting, okay, you want a low-cost plan, why don't you try Lucky? And I understand why you wouldn't want to brand Lucky Mobile as a Bell company. What I don't understand, and I've been poking around the Lucky Mobile website, is why you seem to be, unless I've missed it, seem to be totally silent on any level of network quality on that particular brand. There's a coverage map, but there's nothing else. And I think one could assume that that helps reinforce the perception that flanker brands are indeed lower quality.
I think, again, I go back to the point that said our goal is to differentiate our three brands such that we maximize our market coverage and our opportunity. We have different propositions for each consumer. Network is Bell. We talk about member benefits and affordability with Virgin, and then affordability with lower cost speeds at Lucky. So there's always a trade-off. I think, if we go back to the number of consumers who are switching carriers each and every year, just if you look at the most recent holiday period and you look at what was the percentage of consumers who were choosing flanker brands like Virgin versus Bell versus Lucky, you'll see, and it's available in the public forum, consumers ask the question, what's your experience? What's your experience? What's your experience? It's how we market our brands. If we were to market all of our brands as having access to the best network, why would any consumer make trade-offs? Why would all of your brands would eventually converge? And so I think, you know, it absolutely is our goal in our marketing, branding, and positioning to appear clearly distinct and different. But I can assure you that there's a tremendous amount of switching behavior in the market. And if you are actually to go out into the community today or into one of the retail outlets, they would talk to you about the quality of service. And as evidenced by the mix of consumers that are choosing the flanker brands, I think you know, there is, people understand and appreciate the trade-offs that there are between the brands.
And I think we have a number of shared goals here, and just reading Chair's opening remarks yesterday. So we want lower prices that keep trending lower. I think that's fair. We want network expansion and coverage. I think we all want that as a country. We want the best quality, we want technological upgrades. I want job creation. I'm sure public policy leaders want job creation. And yes, we want to completely align. We want to make sure that each segment of the market is well served. Like, we're aligned. And should we do a better job at that? Yeah, perhaps. And have we been doing a better job? Absolutely. And should we do a better job educating? I think we actually should be doing a better job educating. But there's one thing, I think back to Claire's answer to your question, you know, there was one element in your question, Commissioner McDonald, which is some consumers are reluctant to move to a flanker brand because they want a lower price at the Bell quality. You know, those don't fit. As long as we're serving that market with a good quality product and meeting the needs, that's the goal, not the lowest price at the Bell quality. We don't say we want an Apple MacBook at a generic laptop price. No one ever says that.
And I wasn't trying to suggest that it would make sense to, you know, position it as, you know, the lucky price at Bell quality. But I would suggest that even customers that are very price sensitive, if not at the Bell quality, want some reassurance that there is a certain level of network quality when trying to make an informed decision about switching between yourselves or any of the providers that are out there.
Yeah, I mean, there's a theme emerging around awareness and education.
Thank you. Commission Counsel.
Thank you. I just have one question to ask, and I believe my colleague has a few additional questions. We've heard you speak to the substance of the need to mandate a low-cost or occasional use emergency use plan. Your position on that was rather clear, but I'm asking this question with a view to seeking your position on the appropriate framework or approach to adopt when considering potential deforbearance in this area. So in the event that the Commission were to conclude that the record indicated that there was, that the interests of at least a subset of consumers were not being sufficiently protected, can you comment on the appropriateness of the Commission reasserting its powers under 27(1) and or Section 25 on that basis rather than on a more traditional market power assessment?
So we don't think it's appropriate, and I would just read two quotes from previous Commission decisions on this. So in 2006-15, I think you indicated that to review a forbearance decision, you need evidence of evidence such as a material reduction in the number of competitors offering service in a foreborn market, a material increase in incumbent market share in that relevant market, or a material sustained increase in prices to customers in the foreborn market. I think it's pretty obvious that you have the exact opposite of all three of those things in this case. And then in 2012-520, again, to reestablish rate regulation in a foreborn market, evidence needs to demonstrate that the circumstances that justified forbearance determinations are no longer present. And again, as we've been through, we think it's the opposite case in these circumstances. And there are good policy reasons for those decisions, and we think they continue to apply.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. One thing I was hoping we could have you file, direct you to your intervention of the 15th of May, 2019, page 62, figure 11. It's a figure entitled Average Capital Expenditure per Subscriber 2009 to 2018. We'd ask if you could file the underlying data used to calculate those averages.
Yeah, we'll do that.
Okay, thank you. And then finally, I just have a few questions on voice over LTE. Is that something that you support in your network currently?
Yes, we do.
And is that a functionality that is extended to your domestic roaming customers?
Not at this time, no.
Okay. And are there plans for it to be extended prior to the advance of the deadline for real-time text to 911 being implemented, which is 31 December of this year?
I think we'll have to take that as an undertaking.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, that's all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your submissions and your responses. I wish you a good afternoon. We'll recess for 1 hour, resume at 2:05. Thank you.